the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Boris Johnson's stranglehold on British politics is over. An administration built entirely upon lies and the bogus charisma of one of the single most fraudulent individuals ever to inhabit public life in Britain has come to an inevitable and inglorious end. Even sooner, perhaps, than some of us expected or predicted, but no less spectacular than would have always been the case. Because democracy and decency are twins. You can't have one without the other, and you can't have democracy when there is no decency in Downing Street. And there hasn't been any decency in Downing Street since 2019. I spent yesterday's programme looking at the resignations of Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak, and I think in retrospect we were far too kind to them, particularly perhaps to Sajid Javid. The idea that these men and now women have suddenly discovered a taste for decency, a respect for democracy, a reverence for integrity is absolutely outrageous. To have sat there silently while this man rode roughshod over all of our most valued conventions, traditions, standards, while he once again thought it was churlish of us to expect him to abide by the network of obligation that binds us all, is actually breathtaking in its audacity. How bloody dare they? How dare they talk today about the importance of honesty, the relevance of integrity, the necessity of decency? How dare these nodding dogs and political pygmies posture in a way that casts them as having somehow exercised moral judgment after facilitating, championing and cheerleading a singularly disgraceful and despicable episode in British political history. If you are expecting a celebration on this programme today, then I'm sorry. I was too. And yet, as the dust has settled around this complete carnage, I find myself dispirited, dismayed and angry. There's relief. Of course there's relief. The house is no longer on fire. The arsonist is being driven away in the back of a police van. But the damage that's been done to the country that we love, while these people have tried to cast themselves as patriots, the damage is incalculable and cannot be repaired for generations. Everything is broken. Everything is broken. Broken by the vanity of one man and the cultish dedication to his promotion practiced everywhere from the office of the owner of the Daily Mail right down to the silliest, most deluded voter in the country. It is incredible. Why relief? Because it could have been worse. Yesterday, there were moments when you wondered what the British equivalent of January the 6th would look like. The utter refusal of a man so high on his own self-importance and delusional vanity that he would contemplate anything in protection of his own position. Where would he go next? And thankfully, and I don't think it's something we could take for granted, thankfully, somehow the Conservative Party found not just the means, but the will to slam the brakes upon his ego trip. But there were moments yesterday when I wondered, and you do wonder, of course, how many times have we wondered together over the last few years whether we were the ones that were going mad. But to hear one of Johnson's former bagmen, Will Walden, on at the end of Tom Swarbrick's programme there, talking about how even he feared that we were close to seeing a dismantling of democratic norms. That's how bad it was. Because they would have still cheered. Do you know what the front page of the Daily Mail is today? The owner of the Daily Mail took a decision not long ago to get rid of an editor called Geordie Gregg, who had somehow managed to begin the detoxification of the single most diabolical influence on public life that this country has ever seen. And somehow that editor was managing to turn things around. But the owner took a decision that they were going to go all in on backing Boris Johnson, they were going to bet the house on supporting Boris Johnson, and they were going to get rid of a man who could have changed the face of the British media in a way that is sorely and desperately needed. But they didn't. Do you know what their front page is today? Hold on to your hats. This is supposedly the finest minds on Fleet Street, the best political judgment in our profession. And their front page today, Boris stares down the mutiny. And then page after page after page of praise and paeans to the most corrupt man ever to hold public office in this country. Attacks upon the people that have brought him down, culminating, and you won't believe this, but I've tweeted a picture just to prove it, culminating in a headline that seeks to blame so-called Remainers for Boris Johnson's self-inflicted catastrophe. Crowing Remainiacs is a headline in the Daily Mail today. One of their writers, PMs should be ousted by the people, not a bunch of TV pundits and bureaucrats deranged by Brexit hatred. This was written after the Chancellor of the Exchequer had resigned in disgust, after the Secretary of State for Health had resigned in disgust, after more ministers resigned in a single day under Boris Johnson than had ever resigned under a single Prime Minister in the history of this country. So there will be no celebrations on this programme today, because this is not the beginning of the end. This is the end of the beginning. And what happens next is something that nobody knows. Many, many millions of people aren't ready yet to make the link between Boris Johnson and Brexit, to recognise that the inevitability of this inglorious collapse was written the moment he walked into Downing Street. Written the moment, in many ways, he decided to publish the column calling for a withdrawal from the European Union instead of the one that his genuine instincts led him to, which was the obvious sense and good sense of staying. But my God, spare me the mayor... Well, it's not even mea culpas, is it? Spare me the moral pontifications of people that put him there, and until 2:10 yesterday were bending the knee in front of him. 24 hours it took for Nadhim Zahawi to say on national live television that he doesn't think Boris Johnson lies, that he thinks he tells the truth at all times, to sending a letter calling upon him to walk the plank. Let's not beat about the bush. Very, very clever politicking and tactical nous from Nadhim Zahawi, putting himself in the position of being the most powerful politician in government at precisely the moment that the leadership contest begins, as he probably knew it would. But there were moments yesterday when we were not sure. When the abject, crass, tragic self-regard of one man could have wreaked damage upon this country, the like of which we have never seen before. And that's what I mean by saying that we almost, I think, discovered what the British equivalent of January the 6th in America would have looked like. It would have looked very different. They're completely different countries, completely different political systems, completely different constitutions. One of them is written and one of them is not, as you know. But I don't know. If it wasn't for that unending avalanche of resignation, and the fact that it started again this morning, I think that's probably even more crucial than what happened yesterday. The fact that it started again this morning, the fact that resignation letters were dropping on the Downing Street doormat before your shredded wheat had even been introduced to their morning milk. It was unsustainable. And it reached a point where even the most delusional and despicable man ever to hold public office in this country could no longer keep reality at bay. But my God, he tried. House of Commons yesterday, he meant it. Even when he stood before a select committee and accidentally revealed that he really did meet with a former KGB colonel hours after a NATO meeting and without his security detail. Something that Dominic Raab described as complete nonsense when asked a question by a Labour MP not long ago about precisely those facts which emerged yesterday. The chaos with which he deliberately operates. It's not like an accident or a price worth paying for the occasional brilliance. It's everything that he is corrupt and chaotic. Everything that he does is corrupt and chaotic. Everything he has ever been is corrupt and chaotic. So proper patriots, people who actually love this country, people who actually hate what has been and is being done to it, we don't get to celebrate today, I don't think. We don't even get to take 3 hours off, I don't think. Because the flames may have been extinguished, but the house is a burnt-out wreck. It's a charred shell. It's a broken frame. And I don't know where the repairs start. I don't know what the repairs look like, and I don't even believe that the repairs can begin in good faith until the other big lie is acknowledged, and there is not much chance of that happening anytime soon, because once this dreadful leadership battle gets underway, someone beautifully described yesterday the idea of choosing the next Conservative leader as being like choosing which rancid toilet to go to at the Glastonbury Festival. But when this gets underway, then we're back with the bloody B word, I'm afraid. We're back with the newspapers clinging to the cultish carcass of this ridiculous project, and the leadership candidate who seems most likely to keep the balloon of nonsense inflated will be anointed by the facilitators, will be hosed down by the client journalists like the ludicrous political editor of The Sun and similarly absurd individuals in journalism. They'll all begin the process of pretending none of this ever happened, and Johnson is just a distant memory in our rearview mirror, and moving forward all the same priorities will return to the forefront of public discourse, and the madness will begin again, albeit with a considerably less corrupt ringleader. The circus will be every bit as bonkers. And some of us will sit here wondering what the hell has happened. Some of us will present radio shows every day wondering what the hell has happened. How was this permitted to unfold? How were we allowed to allow this sort of poison, this toxicity into public discourse? Never mind politics, never mind Downing Street. The fire is out. But the house is a charred wreck. I don't know what happens next, and you don't know what happens next. But it's a phone-in show, so we should talk to each other. And the number you need to do that is 0345 6060 973. 2 lines of inquiry, perhaps, although this is one of those mornings where I think we can almost treat each other as each other's therapists. Just ring and chat. Ring and talk. I don't particularly want to hear from many of the public figures. There's a few I'd talk to. I'd like to hear, for example, what Rory Stewart has to say. I was very interested to hear what Andrew Marr had to say, but this isn't a programme where there's a gap that needs filling, so we'll book the What's It editor of the Daily Bugle and I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. I want to listen to you. I want to know what you think about what's happened to us, what's happened to our country, what continues to unfold and unravel. And I want to know what it feels like today to finally see clearly what you've been part of, what you have facilitated. There was one reason and one reason only to vote for Boris Johnson in 2019. He wasn't Jeremy Corbyn. I get that. I get that completely. I voted Labour, but I did so knowing that the Labour leader was about to hand an absolutely enormous majority, gift-wrapped with a big pink bow, to a man who would indubitably prove to be the worst Prime Minister this country has ever seen. I thought the unravelling would take a little longer. I thought that the unveiling of his true self would happen in an incremental fashion. And I worried that when the end came, it wouldn't do justice to the awfulness of the man. I worried that he might slime away, that he might slither out of public office, that history might somehow let him and his facilitators off the hook and posterity would give him a pass. I worried, actually, that the end would not measure up to the middle. But my God, this is an end that could only have happened to someone as unutterably awful as Boris Johnson. The end is every bit as bad and base and gross as his premiership and his character. Unbelievable to imagine that the end could actually live up to the life. And it has. It's over. Boris Johnson is done. He is finished. He is an ex-Prime Minister. But our country, our beloved country, it's going to be living with the legacy of his awfulness for the rest of our lives. I could cry, actually. Not popping champagne corks, not cheering, not bouncing around the studio as I thought I might be. I could cry today. I could cry for my country. And that's incredible and quite unexpected. But enough about me. Rachel Venables is outside Downing Street, where later today Boris Johnson is expected to resign. Precisely what he will resign from remains a little unclear, and the notion of a caretaker government being led by him until the autumn is very much in play. But Rachel, if you would, imagine that we'd just woken up and yours was the first voice that we heard this morning. Tell us what's happened since we went to sleep last night.
Well, James, of course, we've been counting resignations of government ministers, PPSs, secretaries of state ever since 6 o'clock on Tuesday night. That was when Sajid Javid and then Rishi Sunak first decided enough was enough. 52 MPs quitting the government later. The resignation that counts the most is incoming. Behind this famous back door here at number 10 Downing Street, Boris Johnson, we understand, is crafting the statement to signal the end of his premiership. It looks as though it's over. He has decided he is resigning 2 years and 348 days after he first went to the Queen and told her he could form a government. We know that a number 10 Downing Street spokesperson have said on the record that the Prime Minister will make a statement to the country today. We still don't know when, and we also still don't know what exactly he's going to lay out, what his resignation will look like, because it sounds, certainly the political murmurings from many of the correspondents lined down the street here, as though he is going to offer to stay on as Prime Minister and allow a leadership contest to take place, then stepping down once the new leader takes over as Prime Minister sometime in the autumn. However, the strength of feeling amongst the remaining even Conservative cabinet ministers in place is that that can't happen. This morning, even Nadeem Zahawi, his new Chancellor, wrote a letter saying he needs to go, and the perception from many of the people who've newly resigned, even George Freeman, who stepped down as Science Minister this morning, said that's not good enough. He needs to hand over the keys to Downing Street today and let a caretaker Prime Minister take over while the Tories fight amongst themselves about who can replace him.
So, full clarity is yet to arrive. Do we have any idea when the actual speech will be delivered? Are you on lectern duty, Rachel? Are you waiting to see when the lectern is wheeled out into Downing Street? Or is there any prospect, as Chris Bryant called for earlier today, of him delivering the speech in Parliament, as many would perhaps expect?
I'm on lectern duty, sat here at number 10. We're on standby to see any movement of ministerial cars, to see him heading to Parliament. At the moment, as I said, we just don't know. This is a moving feast, and I think it sounds like there are still negotiations going on. He will still be debating, as I mentioned, with members of his own party, with his government, as to, whether or not he is going to appoint a caretaker Prime Minister, in which case, who is that person that could push this announcement back further. We just don't know. What we do know is, as I said, it looks like he is signalling the end, but when that happens in the form it takes, we're still waiting to see.
Rachel Venables live from Downing Street, where, as you heard, she will remain on what is so laughably referred to sometimes as lectern watch, waiting to see whether or not the furniture of public announcements is wheeled out into the street outside that iconic door, and of course when it is, we will cross live and immediately to hear it. I'll allow myself one moment, all right, just one moment, and if there are any more moments like this, then Keith will have to get the tin and you can tell me off. But I hope it happens on our show. I really do. I hope we get to play the metaphorical last post for this disgusting premiership on this programme. I really do, because I know you've felt as lonely as I have at some points over the last 3 years, and if it wasn't for each other, I don't know if we would have got through it. Just staring at the nudity of this ridiculous Prime Minister, staring at the nakedness, being absolutely clear about just how awful he was, and yet turning to other corners of the media, listening to other radio broadcasts, opening up newspapers and seeing a complete denial of reality, a complete distortion of decency. It's been bizarre. And that, I think, is why the expected celebrations have not yet arrived, and quite possibly never will. Because the house may no longer be on fire, but the damage done by the flames is only now being assessed. David's in Leeds. David, what would you like to say?
Do you know what? My favourite phrase that has been repeated ad nauseum over the last few years is the will of the people. We've heard it over and over and over again. And it's just started to become this sort of parody of everything that we really do need to talk about. Because, sure, 2016, the will of the people was to leave the EU. And I get that. And we did. But what's the will of the people now? Are we trying to say that the will of the people hasn't changed since 2016? Because in 2019, more people voted for leftist parties than voted for Boris Johnson's government. And now we're looking at the state of this government, and that government's changed its mind about Boris Johnson being the leader. I don't understand how we got here.
Do you know, I don't know if today's the day. That was one of the questions I was thinking about asking. Between you and me, David, I don't know what's going to come out of my gob until the light comes on. And on a morning like today, I was actually quite frightened that I didn't know what I was going to say and I didn't know what direction things were going to go in. But if I have a sort of vague question bubbling around in the back of my mind, it would be one that we've asked each other many times before, and that is, how has this happened? How did it come to this? We may get onto that question a little later in the programme, but you share my sense of, it's not quite desolation, is it? Because today is a good day for the truth. It is a good day for the decent. But it's a grim view ahead of us, never mind behind us.
I think we're just tired. I think we're all just so tired because, I rang Sheila and I told her my whole story around why Partygate was so upsetting to me. I lost my mum and I had to sit on my own for months. My dad was newly widowed, I didn't get to see him, all of that. And the whole time we're told there were no parties. Oh, well, there was a party, but I wasn't there. Oh, well, there was a party and I was there, but I didn't know it was a party, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then it all came out and we're told, well, yeah, but move on. We've been
not just move on, mate. It's your concerns are fluff, according to one of the last men standing when it came to keeping Boris Johnson's ludicrous administration afloat. I don't know if Jacob Rees-Mogg has said anything yet, but him and Doris, my goodness me, both claim to be Catholic, of course. That's going to be a long confession, isn't it, for them? A very long confession.
Rees-Mogg is just the strangest person, the utter disdain that he shows people, but that's indicative of his boss. Boris Johnson shows disdain to all of us all the time, every single day. We've had to put up with it, and is now the time where the British public can finally stand up as a unit, as a bunch of people, and say what I've been saying for months on everything that I do. We deserve better than that. We deserve better than it.
We do, but I don't know that everybody else is yet ready for the reality or the realisation that clearly settled upon your shoulders long ago. Many people will still, I don't know what the hashtags are going to change to later today, back Boris or our Prime Minister or scum media or whatever it is people are doing to avoid looking in the mirror, because what they will see when they look in the mirror is complicity in a national catastrophe, a completely avoidable and completely self-inflicted national catastrophe, which is why, despite some people having the green shoots of optimism, I don't think you're going to see a Tom Tugendhat in Downing Street anytime soon, or rather at the helm of the Conservative Party. I don't think that anyone will be allowed to achieve prominence who could possibly be open to the accusation of not still being in the Brexit cult, because Johnson and Brexit are twin. They're the twin sons of disgrace. They really are. Johnson and Brexit, you don't get one without the other. You can't separate them. And just because Johnson is going doesn't mean that the equally nonsensical, ridiculous and intellectually bankrupt project of Brexit is going to go with him. 28 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Gerald is in Glasgow. Gerald, what made you pick up the phone?
The absolute state that I'm in at the moment.
Yeah.
Because feels like I've woken up and I've been told I need to sit an exam and I've not studied and I have no idea what I'm meant to answer about.
That's a superb analogy. Thank you. I'm having that. It's like an anxiety dream.
Yeah, I woke up. It's like someone's standing over me, screaming that I need to get myself in some sort of preparedness for what's about to come. And I have absolutely no idea what happened between going to bed and waking up this morning. Yeah. I went to bed with a few dozen ministers and members of the government having resigned. This morning I wake up, it seems like everyone's left. And I have no idea who's driving us off the cliff at the moment. Who can I blame?
Yes, and I don't know who is. I mean, even when we do know who is in the driving seat for the next months, I don't know that you'll have substantive answers to any of the questions that you're currently asking.
The notion of someone replacing Boris Johnson at this point from who we have at our disposal, it's like it's like getting a menu of diseases and having your dad order for you.
I wish I could argue with you, but as you speak...
You have no control.
And this is a high bar, but a man who has a very real claim to being the most ridiculous member of Parliament in history, never mind according to the current dismal crop. But Desmond Swain has just tweeted, "I'm backing Suella."
That's it's like saying I'm backing being scissored in half by a car.
I'm with you. At least we're not alone. There is comfort to be found in company. Meanwhile, if you are in the mood for this sort of gallows humour, then I can tell you that Brexit hardman Steve Baker has claimed that people are imploring him to run for leader. And I think in one interview this morning, he even described himself as the rebel commander. So, like I said, it's not the beginning of the end, it's just the end of the beginning. I won't be inviting most of the faces that are popping up on my television screens in this studio onto the programme today because they don't get to wash their hands so quickly and so completely, even if they submitted their letters and voted for no confidence last time round. They were there in 2019, while the rest of us were screaming at the top of our voices about how naked the Emperor was. Rebel commander, Brexit hardman Steve Baker was insisting that he was absolutely the right man for the job. And they don't get to wash their hands. The stench of corruption and complicity should, of course, hang around these men and women for the rest of their natural lives. But it probably won't. Talking about integrity and decency and honesty. And not once using the word suddenly. I have suddenly decided that integrity and decency and honesty matter in public life. I wonder whether that letter from Simon MacDonald will prove to be the most significant political intervention ever taken by a civil servant, or certainly the most significant element of this story. That perhaps was the moment when somebody found the wherewithal to understand that extraordinarily bad behaviour calls for something out of the ordinary in response. We never got that. I don't know that we ever could as journalists. You can't really describe a Trump or a Johnson using the language and the rubric that we've used to describe all other leaders, because they are not as all other leaders. They are unique in their corruption. Different men, and very different sorts of corruption built on very different foundation stones. But in terms of scale and potential impact, peas in a pod. Utter disregard for the truth and utter dedication to self-advancement, self-promotion, self. So it was Simon MacDonald, perhaps, by essentially calling Downing Street a bunch of lying fraudsters. All of them, not just the Prime Minister, but everyone that he's infected, every bit of the fish that rots from the head down. Maybe that was the moment that it became unsustainable. But don't let these people wash their hands like Pontius Pilate. Don't let them. My God, they're all filthy. All of them, up to their shoulders in filth. Zahawi and Sunak and Javid. Not just the obvious disasters like Rees-Mogg and Doris and Patel and Raab, but the ones who still seek to establish a semblance of respectability or integrity. I called it wrong yesterday. I should apologise to you for that. I think comparing Sajid Javid to Nadeem Zahawi painted Sajid Javid in a temporarily rosy light, but that light went out before the programme was over. They are all utterly gross. Every single one of them. If you absolutely had to stay in the job, then you sat on your hands on the back benches until this monster was gone. And a few of them did that. And the reason why I'm not celebrating this morning is that neither the country nor the Conservative Party is ready yet to reward them and recognise them and put them in the driving seat. The next leader of the Conservative Party will still be a member of the Brexit cult. Either an honest member of the Brexit cult, too stupid and too blinded by delusion and exceptionalism to recognise the reality, or someone cynical enough like Liz Truss to understand that you have to pretend to be part of the Brexit cult in order to get ahead. And of course, Keir Starmer could be out of a job by the end of next week, depending on when Durham police stick their head above the parapet. So no champagne corks today. 10:38 is the time. I'm not going to concern myself unduly with the stupid corner of the inbox this morning, but I am just going to remind you that it's not my fault that you see what you see when you look in the mirror that I hold up. It's not my fault, okay? It's not entirely your fault either. It's the fault of people like Boris Johnson and newspaper editors and newspaper owners. It's certainly not my fault. But you don't have to look. You can look away. You can turn over. You can go and do something less boring instead, as that song used to say on Why Don't You? But it's not my fault that you see what you see. But what you see is real. Ricky's in Bristol. Ricky, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Ricky.
I'd just like to say that actually I'm quite disappointed that Bojo's gone this early.
Go on.
I was hoping he was going to stick around a bit longer, possibly till sort of general election time, where the opposition would actually have a decent chance of, sort of easy pickings, if you like.
I think I understand your point. I'm always slightly wary of it. It's a bit like in newspapers, if you've got a really good story and you take it into conference on a Monday and everyone gets really excited about it, but then something happens like Boris Johnson resigning and it gets pushed up until Tuesday, and then you go into conference on Tuesday and suddenly the story doesn't feel as... This is the only analogy I can use because it's my world, but everybody else will have something from their own world. Do you know what I mean? You put something in the fridge thinking it's going to stay fresh, and it actually doesn't. These plans, these machinations sometimes can backfire.
Yeah, absolutely that. I think the difficult thing for me is that we've seen it so often where the public are so quick to forget.
Exactly.
And the worry I have is that, someone else will take over. Hopefully it won't be anybody anywhere near as bad as Bojo, but with the current,
Can we not call him that? Can we just call him Johnson? Sorry, it's a small thing, but it's really grinding my gears to hear you talk about him like some sort of funny jester-type character when he's an arsonist of the very... It's all right. I know, but I'm not having it. Sorry.
So Johnson, hopefully it won't be anywhere near as bad as him, but if it is, and what they'll try and do, I think, is just try and sweep all of that under the carpet. That was Johnson's government. That has nothing to do with us.
Oh, they all will. They all will. Incredibly. Exactly. I think the only one that won't be able to is probably Doris. I don't think that she would even be able to contemplate pretending that she wasn't right there until the very last.
Yeah. And then, the general public will just forget and they'll vote for them again. They just will. And I just think it's a bit disappointing. I was just really hoping that, Labour would have really easy pickings come general election time and it would be a bit of a stampede. But,
Well, I mean, who knows? Johnson probably still had some sort of electoral cachet with the country. The whole tactic, as we've described a million times on this programme, is to wait and to prolong, to procrastinate and to postpone all the P's. And then wait for something to come along that just takes the edge off the last scandal. And it's worked for him for his entire life, in every corner of his life, in his rancid sex life, in his political life, in his professional life. Every single time events, egregious behaviours that would end normal careers have popped up in Boris Johnson's life. He has sat it out until his wife takes him back, or his mistress forgives him, or his party leader gives him another chance, or his employer indulges him one final time. He's always got away with it, and that's what yesterday was about. Can I string it out? Can I string it out for a bit longer? Can I string it out? Because something will come up. Something might happen, and we can... He would have tried, and he tried in select committee. I've got to be focusing on this, and he's never focused on anything in his life. But it might still have landed. I've been watching him for too long. I've counted him and counted him out too many times to have ever been completely confident that the writing was truly on the wall. But I'm confident now. It's 10:42. Dave's on the Isle of Man. Dave, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Dave.
I was never really interested in politics at all until I'd sit down, have my morning coffee, I'd watch the morning shows, and started realising that they're taking me for a bit of an idiot.
Yeah.
You'd sit there and blatant lies would be coming out from these people that are now jumping ship, saying that Johnson is no longer, he's no longer got the beans for it. He tells lies and we finally realised it. These are the same people that are going to run for office that have blatantly come on TV and said, oh, we were briefed by number 10. All they needed to be briefed by was facts before they started spouting lies on television. Why did they need to be briefed by number 10 to come on and just tell factual lies? I'm not even sure that's a thing, but blatant lies against how the economy's doing, against how Brexit is doing, how
job numbers, economic growth, all of that. I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't know. How do you tell the difference between the ones who believe the lie and the ones who know they're lying?
If you're in Parliament and you're coming on TV to talk to me about the economy and how it's going, I don't expect them to get it from one of Johnson's aides to tell them this. They need to look at the facts and figures and then come on TV and tell me that. They don't need to be briefed by anybody, especially one of Johnson's aides, to tell me.
Again, I think what we're doing is describing the inadequacy of the current and the traditional frameworks and systems for dealing with someone as corrupt as Boris Johnson. Whoever is next, they will not be as corrupt as Boris Johnson. They might still be swigging the Brexit Kool-Aid, but they will not stand in front of you and claim that black is white. They just won't. It can't happen. It's a once-in-a-lifetime aberration, and the system then works because you might be sent out to spin slightly, or you might be sent out to embellish or to be a little bit economical with the actuality, but you won't be sent out to tell bare-faced lies.
Yeah. I mean,
and they all did it, Dave. That's the point. They're all trying to wash their hands today, but they all did it. Every single last one of them did it, and I believe they knew they were doing it, except the really, really, really stupid ones.
I mean, James, I didn't know. I didn't know the difference between left and right, to be honest with you, before I really started getting into it. I mean, I follow Twitter for supporting my football team and things like that, and then my friends keep telling me, God, you've gone all serious all of a sudden, haven't you, Dave? And it was kind of beefing me that much that me mates would put me on mute because I'm
welcome to my world.
But, you get so blatantly caught up in it by made to look a fool. And not only that, do they come out with these, the lies about the economic growth and such, but then if something's going wrong, they then divide people by pointing at dinghies.
Yeah.
By pointing that it's his fault over there. And that's it's just wrong.
It's so transparent, but it doesn't make it any less effective. I mean, I almost feel guilty if I've played a part in bringing you to this place where you cannot look away from the skip fire that is British politics. But that's patriotism. Whatever nonsense Liz Truss may spout in the House of Commons, caring deeply and passionately about the state of the population of your country. And I mean the people. I don't mean flags or photographs or statues. I mean the people of this country. And being furious at the way they are being treated, have been treated, and will continue to be treated. That is patriotism. That is patriotism. But as Dave says, look, over there, some desperate people on a dinghy. Let's all get cross about them now and let the Tories off the hook. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The legacy that Boris Johnson leaves behind is best understood by looking at the calibre of the people that he put in the House of Lords. Absolutely abysmal. Daniel Hannan, Daniel Moylan, Claire Fox, Zach Goldsmith, Evgeny Lebedev. That story came back to life yesterday, as we knew it must, as we knew it would. Ian Botham, great cricketer, don't get me wrong, but if you want to get a measure of the man, have a look at the people he elevated into ermine, and then worry about what the rest of the country is going to look like as the dust begins to settle on his final departure. And of course, one face that hasn't been seen in the House of Lords, or indeed the House of Commons, for the duration of Boris Johnson's premiership is Rory Stewart, although his name remains upon the lips of many political commentators. And indeed, I was interviewing Miriam Margolyes yesterday, Rory Stewart of all people, and she was talking about what a stand-up guy you are and how much she wished that you had kept a hand on the tiller of British politics. Thank you for your time this morning. Can we talk as if we're not on the radio? Would you mind? Can I just ask how you're feeling?
Sure. I'm feeling exhausted. I'm feeling, obviously, a great sense of relief that he's finally announced that he's going. I'm also feeling a bit of uncertainty, a bit of trepidation about what's going to happen over the next few months. I mean, how quickly is he actually going to go? Because if he tries to hang around, as he'll be tempted to, saying that he's got to be there until, let's say, October, he can cause a lot of problems in the remaining months. And this is obviously a very, very serious time in every way. I mean, I'm not just talking about the fact that our fuel bills are going to be tripling. I'm really worried about the global situation as well. I'm very worried about China, Taiwan, as well as Russia. And I think every day that he remains is going to inflict more and more damage on the country.
Because no hand on the tiller at all doesn't just involve aimlessly floating around until a new captain is appointed. It actually involves making things worse than they would be even with someone as awful as Boris Johnson still in charge?
Well, I definitely think, we definitely need to get rid of him immediately. What I'm worried about is that he may try to negotiate for a situation in which he hangs around until the next leader comes in. So it would be much, much better to put an interim leader in, to put in, even somebody like Dominic Raab in an interim situation than let Boris hang around. Because if he hangs around, he'll start reappointing a new cabinet. And knowing him, he'll probably hope that by the end of the year, everyone, or by the time the election comes around, everyone will have changed their mind and he can somehow cling on.
The procrastinate, postpone, prevaricate tactic that has served him so well at every other turn in his life. Why did he run out of road, in your view? What were the clinchers in the last few days?
I began to feel that he was in real trouble when he lost the chairman of his party, Oliver Dowden. So that was after the disastrous Tiverton by-election defeat. And that was the moment. And I thought that was striking because Oliver Dowden had been out defending him very, very hard. He'd actually done some very disturbing things. He'd gone to the United States, weighing into the cultural wars on statues. He was somebody who was very ambitious. He'd been a supporter of David Cameron and flipped very easily to Boris Johnson. And I thought if he's leaving, he really has, he's somebody who has sensed something. And I wasn't therefore very surprised that that was really what turned out to be the beginning of the 2 weeks. Rishi Sunak, who with Oliver Dowden was one of Boris Johnson's very earliest backers from that intake, then went. And I think in the end, that's what brought it down. I think the idealists came out against him quite a long time ago. And of course, 75% of his backbenchers, or something like that, voted against him in the no confidence vote. But what really tipped it were the more ambitious insiders who began to sense that their careers were not helped by sticking with him. And when that happened, he was finished. I'm
getting a lot of reports that Conservative MPs are very, very keen to refer to your opening point, to get this over and done with quickly and not to have him hanging around. Sebastian Payne at the FT is talking about countless Conservatives getting directly in touch with him. And I think Bob Neal, former deputy chairman of the party, has gone public with that request as well. The problem is, as ever, Rory Stewart, the problem is that we're talking about Boris Johnson. So all the smoke signals and writing on the wall in the world that under any other circumstances with any other leader would point very clearly in one direction. With him, it doesn't work like that. He will resist furiously to defend whatever he thinks is in his best short-term interest, never mind long-term.
Oh, it's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, one of the weird things is you'll remember that when he was, when he resigned as foreign secretary, he refused to actually leave the building. There were these incredibly embarrassing moments where the senior civil servant in the Foreign Office had to keep saying, when are you going out? Because everybody else leaves that day. The classic images, the moving vans turn up, one lot comes out. So, and in that case, he hung around, I think, for 3 weeks because he didn't want to pay the rent on a flat. And it's quite possible he's going to try to do the same here again. But it's really, he's I think what he's revealed in the last 2 days particularly, I mean, that's when it's gone completely mad. I mean, that's when, when you start losing your two most senior members of your cabinet, you start losing 30 other ministers and you're still trying to hang on. What he reveals is that it was such a central ego trip that he just didn't care at all about his party, about the Conservative Party, about trying to give it any future, keep it together. I mean, these parties are traditionally in British politics a sort of broad coalition of different people with different voices. And the Prime Minister was supposed to be just a kind of first among equals, a kind of cabinet government. It's not meant to be a presidential system. So really, somebody like Theresa May would never in that situation have tried to hang around. It beggars belief. I mean, I think in all the bad things that he's done, those last 2 days were among the worst. I'm not feeling at all inclined to be sort of courteous, dignified, more in sorrow than in anger. I just feel he's awful.
You've known him for most of your life. Is there a single scintilla of surprise at just how awful he's proved to be in the final furlong?
I suppose I couldn't quite believe that he would try to hang on in those circumstances, because I thought that he, with all the horror, had a sort of beady instinct for his own, himself. And I think it's just damaged him even more than his conduct in government. I mean, there's a lovely poetic line about King Charles I going to have his head chopped off, and Marvel says, and nothing in his life suited him as much as the leaving of it. And in Boris Johnson's case, I mean, it's the reverse. I mean, unlike Charles I, the kind of disgraceful time in government is followed up by a completely disgraceful exit.
Speaking of exits, what about you? People always ask whenever you appear on the programme whether or not you would return to frontline politics. It would be a lot easier now than it would have been last week.
Yeah, so, James, I'm obviously not an MP, so I'm not a leadership candidate. You have to be a member of parliament to be running for leadership. I think if I felt the party could come back onto a more moderate centre ground path, I think there are some very, very serious things happening in the world. And I would be deeply, deeply honoured to try to help if I could in some way. I think realistically it's pretty difficult, to be honest, if you're not an MP. They're going to be filling their cabinet in a way that tries to rebuild different bits of the party. So my guess is nobody's going to be calling me, but I think that I would love to do it. I would love to do it, particularly if I thought we could rebuild the centre ground of British politics. I hate this kind of lurch to populism in the sense that we're becoming like a mini United States.
In the meantime, you're keeping busy, not least with the podcast you co-host with Alistair Campbell, The Rest is Politics. Next time you record an episode, here's a little teaser for you to ask him. Who was the last Prime Minister to both enter and exit number 10 Downing Street via a general election?
Oh, that's very good. Okay, I'm going to do an emergency thing in 5 minutes with him. I'll ask him that. Thank you.
Rory Stewart, many thanks indeed. And I'll leave that hanging as a hook and tease on this programme as well. There's some dispute about who it might have been, but I'm going to tell you something for nothing. It was a very, very, very long time ago, which is a remarkable reflection of politics, but also, I think, a reminder of the fact that this too will pass. Yes, Johnson has been and remains uniquely awful, but it looks as if the system has survived in a way that I don't think many Americans are currently confident they could say the same about their system. It looks as if ultimately the system could actually expel the toxin from the body politic, and that expulsion likely to be confirmed in the next couple of hours, hopefully while we are on air. So back to the question of simply how you're doing this morning, but also I think perhaps time to ask now how we all feel about these people trying desperately to wash their hands of him in public. And, you know, I just asked myself during the news bulletin there which other former Conservative MPs I would be as interested in hearing from, or even more interested in hearing from than Rory Stewart. And there's only actually one name on my list. That's Michael Heseltine, Lord Heseltine, who will join us imminently. So as things stand, the mood music, to use that dreadful phrase that is very popular at moments like this, is very much that the Conservatives, the membership, the MPs, are very keen not to see Boris Johnson remain in post until the autumn as a sort of caretaker government which would remain in place while the business of finding a replacement for him is undertaken. They are categorically resisting that, according to almost every report that I can see, and I'm not someone who's routinely in receipt of messages from Conservative MPs. I do bizarrely get the odd one, but I mean your proper political correspondents who will be in WhatsApp groups and who will be able to canvass the feeling among the members in a way that I can't do. So that's interesting. It tallies with Rory Stewart's fears, or rather it addresses Rory Stewart's fears and offers some reassurance that probably won't be permitted. You know, if it happens today, then he doesn't even overtake Neville Chamberlain. And if he goes today and Dominic Raab or AN other steps in as a caretaker Prime Minister, there was one report in the newspaper today suggesting Theresa May might do it. But if that happens in the next 48 hours, then he doesn't even overtake Neville Chamberlain on the list of longest-serving prime ministers. As Holly just said in the news there, the 28-day limit would be for Theresa May. To overtake Theresa May, he'd have to wait for a month. So that's story number one that's bubbling under at the moment. Story number two would be the leadership candidates who have got campaign teams and plans in place. Robert Peston, the political editor of ITV, of course, has put that together. He's got Rishi Sunak, Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt, Liz Truss, Suella Braverman. Wow. Tom Tugendhat, Nadeem Zahawi and Penny Mordaunt. I think you can add Brexit hardman Steve Baker to that list because he seemed to announce his possible candidacy earlier this morning, but, you know, these are crazy times. Michael Heseltine joins us now. Lord Heseltine, of course, a former Deputy Prime Minister, and I think you'll allow me to suggest, Lord Heseltine, somebody who has counted them in and indeed counted them out. How does this one rank in your memories?
Well, the real distinction, the only distinction, is the lack of dignity in this occasion. It's quite obvious since Michael Howard and William Hague, as former leaders of the party, said the game was over, and then the 148 MPs who voted that the Prime Minister would have to go. But it's been a very undignified process, and, well, anyway, at least said, soon as mended, so to speak.
Well, yes, and what does mending look like?
Well, this is the great problem, because I coined the phrase that if Boris goes, Brexit goes, because of all the achievements, if you can call it that, Boris can claim it is getting Brexit done. And, of course, it was done on the basis of a pack of lies, which now are unravelling. And the other interesting piece of political misfortune is that Keir Starmer obviously believed he was going to be fighting Boris Johnson on a high Brexit ticket.
Yes.
And made that ridiculous speech he made the other day. Now going to have to rewrite that speech.
You think so? You think so?
Oh, I think so. Because
it was a gun spiking exercise and the guns have gone.
Exactly, and the bullets are not going to be fired. Well, look, I can't be sure because we're in an unpredictable period. But as I understand it, the Conservative Party will now need to regroup on a much more centralist position if it's going to have a chance of winning back the votes it's lost, particularly to the Dems in the south of England. I think it'll be very difficult to win back the Labour votes in the north, but in the south of England, the Lib Dems are making big inroads on safe Tory seats on a pro-European ticket. So the Tories, I think, will have to remember what they were told by every Prime Minister after Churchill, that our destiny is in Europe. Now, that doesn't mean to say we ought immediately apply to rejoin the European Union, but we have got to change the relationship, and all the sniping and snide remarks and the
threats,
confrontation in Northern Ireland,
yes,
and the ludicrous spectrum that we're going to tear up a whole range of rules which make civilized behaviour legally protected. All that sort of stuff's got to go.
Well, you're describing a reality that is recognisable to most of my listeners, but much of the country still views reality through the lens of the right-wing media, and certainly through that lens, Brexit credentials are going to be crucial in the leadership election, and they're not going to be looking for credentials like yours, Lord Heseltine.
Yes, but you have to look not at the right-wing newspapers, who, curiously enough, if you read them as carefully as I do, the journalists are beginning to revolt, that news stories are appearing which make a nonsense of the editorial policy. I mean, the most obvious is the Daily Mail and the report from the OECD, yes, that shows that Britain is going to be the least effective economy, other than, I think, Russia, of all the major economies. And even the Daily Mail published this league table. Of course, I think they didn't make a huge headline out of it. But if you read the Daily Telegraph, well, look at the city columns, and you will see some quite interesting things are being reported there. So the journalists, who are not slaves to the editorial policy, are using their news coverage opportunities to let the truth in, But don't worry about the extreme right wing. Talk about the opinion polls and the by-election results. And that's what, if I was chairman of the Conservative Party, heaven forfend, I would be saying to my colleagues, this is the target ground. This is the balance we have to achieve.
I thought it was only me that had noticed that about the newspapers. The comment pages continue to be completely crackers, but the news pages have absolutely, the Telegraph, I would say more than the Mail, have actually undergone something of a transformation in the last 6 months. It's always good to know you're not alone in these contemplations. If you were pushed, I just read out the list of people who've already thrown their hats into the ring. Is it fair to ask you whether or not any of them tickle your fancy?
Oh, it's totally fair to ask me, but you won't be surprised that I know that in certain parts of the Tory party I'm toxic.
It's the kiss of death.
The last thing I would do is to put my name behind someone I wanted to win. The most effective thing I could do in many cases is choose the least attractive person and back them to the hills.
Finally, Lord Heseltine, there is very little air of celebration anywhere at the moment. I mean, including people who have been perhaps devoutly wishing for this day to arrive, because, albeit that the arsonist may be leaving the building, the damage is only now going to start being fully assessed. How much damage has he done, leaving Brexit aside now, how much damage has he done to the sort of rubric of government, to the framework of democracy?
I think that you can't leave Brexit aside.
No, I know.
It's not just an economic disaster. It is a disaster with the truth. And so as the truth is at the heart of the dilemma you're talking about, you can't ignore Brexit.
Right,
but on the terms of the truth, I'm afraid that the truth for Boris is something you use when convenient and disregard when inconvenient. There is no integrity or serious political philosophy behind the Johnson premiership. It is opportunism, photo opportunity, tell them what they want to hear, move on. Some people, it's quite attractive, sort of boosterism, but the truth of the matter is that the truth is very different. We are now facing one of the worst economic circumstances I can remember. There's no point in pretending that changing the leader is going to change the economy. It's not. But if I could give advice to whoever becomes the leader, I would say to them, look, get out there and tell the truth as it is, because you have got to regain trust. And people, they know in their guts that you can't cut taxes and just pile more money onto borrowing at a time when interest rates are going to rise and mortgage payers are going to be consequently hurt. The money, well, I've been a supporter, indeed a member of Tory governments for now quite a long period of time. And there was a certain integrity. We tried to tell people that if you want tax cuts, you've got to earn them and you've got to have a growing economy. We've got a stagnant economy, and therefore tax cuts means more borrowing, more interest rates. And at a time of high inflation, it's going to be tough enough for people without deluding them into the idea that central government has got some magic wand. It hasn't.
Right, and that's going to be a key platform in the looming leadership battle.
And just look what's happening to the pound.
Yes.
So the international marketplace, they know what's going on. And of course, as the pound goes down, import prices go up. More trouble on the inflationary front.
And fuel. A final word on all the erstwhile cheerleaders and facilitators who are now furiously trying to wash their hands of Boris Johnson on the public stage. What would you make of them? Will it work?
They would, wouldn't they?
Lord Heseltine, many thanks indeed. 14 minutes after 11 is the time. They would, wouldn't they? Almost channeling Christine Keeler there towards that's an unexpected comparison. It's coming up to 11:15. The number you need is 0345 6060973. Or was it Mandy Rice Davis? I can never remember. The question we're asking now perhaps will include the one that I just asked Lord Heseltine there. What do you think of the hand-washing exercises, these attempts to disassociate? Oliver Dowden, Rory Stewart reminded us, was really absolutely up to his elbows in the whole culture war horrors, the whole made-up nonsense about values being under threat or the West being in some sort of jeopardy, the corrupt chicken-licking type rhetoric of very far-right demagogues and journalists in America, people who think that statues are more important than human beings and that slavery is defensible, all of that. So Dowden was absolutely immersed in it, and yet he was the first to break cover and say, up with this I will not put. It's odd that. And of course, underpinning all of our pontifications this morning is the big question of how are you responding to this news? I'm surprised to feel so low. Actually, I mean, it's an enormous relief. I keep going back to the arson, and I think it works better than almost anything else. We've caught the arsonist. The flames are being extinguished. But my goodness me, that house is nothing like the one that we had just 6 short years ago. Hugh Edwards has turned up at number 10 Downing Street, the doyen of BBC broadcasters, and given how many have now joined us over at LBC, he's one of the only true legends left on the payroll at the BBC, but that means that events are afoot. If I had to put a few quid on it, you know what ratio I'm going to go for? Will the resignation happen on our show? I'm going to go 52-48, yes. I don't want to jinx it. I don't want to jinx anything. But as I say that, Beth Rigby, the rather splendid political editor over at Sky News, reports that the Prime Minister has let it be known he will shortly be making new appointments to his ministerial team. Okay, deep breaths. So yesterday he appointed a Chancellor of the Exchequer and a Secretary of State for Education who have already called for him to resign. This, I think, is what Heseltine and Stewart were talking about. Two, if you like, Tory statesmen of different generations and quite different outlooks in many ways, but nevertheless, men who've earned the right to be described, I think, as statesmen. And that's what they were both worried about. It's as if the head has been removed, but the chicken is still running around the farmyard. The Chancellor has said you've got to go. He hasn't had the job for 24 hours. Well, he's barely had the job for 24 hours. And then the woman that replaced him at Health, Michelle Donnellan, has added her voice to the clarion calls for Johnson to do the right thing. And yet he's now talking about making new appointments to his ministerial team. Not obviously with a view to remaining Prime Minister, but with a view permanently, but with a view to remaining Prime Minister briefly. That's incredible. Julian Suffolk says it's like a zombie nightmare. They keep killing him and he keeps coming back to life. I find that breathtaking, actually. I don't know. I mean, the reshuffle, Tim Shipman as well at the Sunday Times, someone who really does know exactly what is going on. And Tim Shipman writes the reshuffle will continue shortly, which, I mean, is actually both hilarious and incredible at the same time. Absolutely incredible. I think someone told me at the top of the show on Twitter they were going to neck a little shot of something every time I use the phrase absolutely incredible, so I should be careful. I don't want to get you into trouble, and I certainly wouldn't want to think that you were driving later. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Why? Because we're talking about the resignation of Boris Johnson, which is likely to happen in the next couple of hours. Mike's in Northampton. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hi, mate. Thanks very much for having me on.
Well, I'm sorry to keep you for so long, but Heseltine could only do that slot, and I took the view that you'd wait and he wouldn't. I hope that's okay, Mike.
I mean, I don't really mind waiting. It's more just having to follow Rory Stewart and Michael Heseltine, but you know,
no pressure. No pressure.
No pressure. I'll do my best. I was ringing in actually because you said you wanted to treat this as a therapy session, and I'm right there with you. I genuinely thought that on the day that Boris Johnson left, I would be popping champagne corks, but I feel sick, mate. Honestly, just watching all of these people who put him into the position in the first place, who have propped him up through all the disgusting behaviour, who have committed a lot of disgusting behaviour themselves.
Yeah.
now clapping themselves on the back.
It's incredible.
Saying enough is enough.
Yeah.
Enough was enough before he took the job, and they all knew that. We all knew who he was. Like Sajid Javid's speech yesterday, I don't think I've ever heard something more deluded and self-congratulatory in my life.
I was quite impressed at the time, but as the clock ticked and my journey home on the tube unfolded, I think I lost 10% of my admiration for it with every station that we went through, and by the end I was somewhere around zero.
It was like, mate, you accepted a job with him, not once, but twice.
Yeah, but it's all relative, isn't it? It's all relative.
Yeah.
You're sort of comparing him to the absolute awfulness of a Doris or a Rees-Mogg, or even yesterday it looked like a Zahawi, although that has become more complicated than perhaps first impressions allowed. And you think relatively he's emerging with some credit, but then of course you get objectivity back.
The credit, though, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
He was almost, saying to everyone else, inaction is an action. It's like, well, yeah, you've been inactive for quite a long time in this regard. So to be lecturing the other people that were still sat with him because you decided just before to do a little coordinated jump. I don't know, this is who the modern Conservative Party is, isn't it? They replace people like Rory Stewart and Dominic Grieve with people like Lee Anderson, who wants to stick people in tents and get them to pick potatoes and seasonal vegetables, and people like Brendan Clark-Smith, the Bassett Law MP, who said that English footballers taking the knee was like doing the Nazi salute. This is, they've absorbed the far right to win an election. They sold their soul, and this is where they are.
Let's be a bit more generous.
A sensible person next, is it?
No. But let's be a little bit more generous to the bigger picture, as it were, not to the individuals you've singled out quite rightly for criticism, but in the sense that the Brexit impasse was real. Theresa May had failed severally to get anything over the line, and she was pretty clearly never going to. Now, they're never going to admit out loud, whether they understand it or not, that the only way you could ever get it through Parliament was by lying to the DUP, lying to the people of Northern Ireland, lying to the people of Great Britain. There was no earthly way it was ever going to get over the line unless enough people believed that it was oven ready, or that it would get Brexit done, or that it wouldn't involve a border appearing in the Irish Sea. So I'm not being a devil's advocate on this one, but if you need to sell an enormous lie, you need an enormous liar. They're never going to turn around and admit that. But it does at least apply a version of logic to proceedings since the middle of 2019, rather than it being some sort of inexplicable, incomprehensible skip fire.
Oh, God, absolutely. But, they knew all this going in. Like, I don't. Yeah. The only sympathy. Well, I think hang on. The rest of the country.
Yeah, but what I guess I'm saying is that they knew he was going to sell that enormous lie, and they knew that they needed him to do it, but they didn't expect everything else to be quite as awful as it proven to be. I'm not defending or excusing.
Oh, no, of course not.
I'm just explaining.
It just sounds like a rubbish kind of action film. Like there's only one man who can get this over. Well, maybe we shouldn't do it. They have to sell it based on lies, and maybe we should not. Obviously, I agree with you. It shouldn't have happened. I completely understand how they've got it. I just think they've sold their soul. Today they're calling for, we need a caretaker now. It's like, well, number one, you were all backing him to the hill a week ago. And number two, who's that caretaker going to be? Like Dominic Raab? Didn't he kind of claim that he couldn't possibly have been on the beach during the Afghanistan crisis because the sea was closed? Is he the person that we need to steady the ship? Like, I really despair.
No, well, I thought Heseltine was surprisingly optimistic about the likelihood of a meaningful change or a sort of branding or rebuilding of the Conservative Party, but I'm not as optimistic as he is about the distorting lens of Brexit and the right-wing media, meaning that huge swathes of the public and, of course, the Parliamentary Conservative Party remain utterly detached from reality. Mike, thank you. Tanya's in Colchester. Tanya, what would you like to say?
Oh, right, okay, we're keeping on the theme, I think, of the therapy session here today.
Yeah, good. We both need it.
Well, we all need it. I hope you're doing all right as well, good God. I've been commentating for the last 2 years on politics, and I wasn't involved in politics before, but I felt like I had to do it because I noticed how the client media were just in absolute cahoots with Johnson, and they weren't speaking the truth to power, or that they were just speaking the lies of power and manipulating people. So I felt like I had to try and tell people the truth about what was going on. But the thing that really concerns me is the absolute downfall of our democracy, in the sense that the newspapers are the people that are choosing our Prime Minister. It's only when they turn that we have a shot of getting even someone that's debased politics to the extent of Johnson out of power.
This has been true for decades, though, Tanya. This isn't a recent arrival on the political stage. There's not been a prime minister in my lifetime that wasn't approved of by Rupert Murdoch.
But Johnson, though, and the thing that concerns me is that you know, his legacy is going to be something that's probably the worst act of self-harm ever inflicted on this country. And you know, the problem is the opposition party is so, you know, they're so focused on having to bat away the culture wars. But they can't express themselves, I feel, truthfully.
It might change now. There's a silver lining. There's a silver lining for us. So Johnson is no longer defining discourse. You know, his ludicrous and disgusting references to things like Jimmy Savile or you know, less disgusting but just as ludicrous talk of Captain Hindsight or talking nonsense about Keir Starmer voting to stop Brexit when Boris Johnson himself was the biggest fly in the ointment of Theresa May's attempts to get Brexit legislation over the line. I think that shamelessness has gone now. I mean, I hesitate to put it in such terms, but he's a brilliant liar. And even if the next one is a liar, they won't be a brilliant liar, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, but the con has been established, hasn't it? I mean, they're still continuing to kind of cash in, I think, and they wouldn't be there, would they, necessarily in the positions where they could throw their tattered hat in the ring if it wasn't for him having put them there. So, and you know, you mentioned about how Murdoch and etc. have kept people in power, yes, but the authoritarian laws that the government are bringing in, especially in terms of trying to overturn the Official Secrets Act to try and further clamp down on journalists telling the truth.
I'm not across that. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's been.
I'm looking at protest, and I'm looking at the European Convention on Human Rights. So there's plenty of stuff that I am across. Again, I wonder how much of this will remain in place because it's red meat politics, and if we are to start rebuilding the house, then red meat has no place. We need bricks and mortar, and I do wonder whether the next leader will try to focus. The problem, of course, and this is why perhaps the scale of this humiliation and the scale of this disaster may prove to be a good thing in the long run, because it frees up the party to start talking about the disaster of the last 3 years, to stop blathering nonsense about getting all the big calls right or the ludicrous defences that they've tried. He's made such an almighty mess of the final page that maybe they can torch the whole book. Maybe.
Well, I don't think they will. I think what follows is going to get worse. I really don't think it's going to get worse.
Blimey, all right, Chuckles.
You know, because the problem is the public are being held hostage by the legacy of that. I mean, I mean, believe me, I get called anti-patriotic, all manner of horrific things.
Yeah, but only by racists. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
By all sides, actually, because everywhere is kind of on fire at the moment a little bit. But the problem is, like, I can see the client media are going to get behind his replacement. I think it's going to. I think it's going to continue.
We shall see. I mean, certainly they will need to be anointed. I feel a little bit hypocritical cautioning people about using the phrase client media. There's not much of it. There are only 3 or 4 journalists who fully fit that description, the kind of people who would never say boo to a Boris Johnson-flavoured goose. Most obviously the political editor of The Sun, a ludicrous character called Harry Cole. But most people, even if they're working for a Murdoch newspaper or even the Mail, don't actually deserve that sobriquet. Things are never quite as bad as they appear, as Heseltine picked up on. The news pages, even of the Telegraph and the Mail, are reflecting reality now, even as the comment pages continue to be absolute clown cars. And oddly, it was a journalist on one of those newspapers who drew my attention to the possibility that the scale of this disaster could be quite a silver lining, because no one can pretend that this is some sort of fringe rebellion or that it's business as usual, yet another Tory schism for the next generation or the next term of Parliament. This is so absolutely awful, the final page, the final chapter, that they perhaps can see it as a positive for party unity and start talking maybe even out loud, about fixing the damage that he's done. I don't know, that's probably overly optimistic, but it's a corrective to Tanya's pessimism. Siobhan Benita, a former civil servant who, of course, was the Lib Dems mayoral candidate in 2012 and 2020, tweeted me this morning to say, tomorrow I'll revert to rage and despair, James, but today, not least on behalf of all the decent civil servants I used to work with, I am celebrating the fact that a corrupt liar who should never have got within miles of number 10 won't be there for much longer. Speaking of number 10, Rachel Venables is there. I have to just point out, I don't know if she'll thank me for this. This is Rachel Venables' sort of third day as a political correspondent. Theo Osherwood is indisposed this week, and Ben Kentish is on holiday. So Rachel has stepped into the breach, and it's fair to say that if you clock off at the end of this week, Rachel, it would have been one of the most remarkable political correspondent careers in history.
Almost as short as Michelle Donlan's education secretary stint, is that right?
I don't know. What's the latest? What's on the horizon and what's in the rear-view mirror?
Well, I'll tell you what, no podium yet. Still no sign of Boris Johnson down here at Downing Street. We haven't seen him even peeking out behind the net curtains at number 10, but as you can probably hear behind me from the noise, a good 100 or so journalists and photographers packed out here, fighting for space behind the barriers on the pavement at Downing Street. We are waiting breathlessly for that statement from Boris Johnson. We think he's going to come out and deliver it. No confirmation yet, and we still don't know the exact timing, though it looks from multiple sources as though that's going to be at midday, around about midday. So we're hoping 12 o'clock. It might be closer to 1. We shall see if it happens in your time. In the meantime, we believe that Boris Johnson, it looks as though he's been pretty busy in number 10 here. He's been busy replacing some of the ministers he either lost or sacked. It's been reported, for example, that Greg Clark, former business secretary, is going to replace Michael Gove as the Levelling Up and Housing Minister. It looks as though he is trying to assemble something of a cabinet that he thinks he can limp to the autumn with, saying that he's going to continue as Prime Minister until a leadership election can take place. So defying many within his own party who thinks he should walk out today, hand over the keys and let a caretaker Prime Minister take his place instead. So that is really what we're watching and waiting for. And
it being Boris Johnson, I'm beginning to think he won't. I'm beginning to think that they will all be telling him he's got to go today, but he won't go today because it's his modus operandi. It's what he's always done. How many jobs does he have to fill? 55, is it? Or
54, I think, was the latest tally, although there were some who said, certainly at least one who said that they would resign if he didn't go. So I don't know if him vowing to continue on but go in the autumn would mean he's got a few more. Some of those posts can remain unfilled for a time. Obviously, some are much more important. And we saw today around 8 ministerial ministers quitting, including the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Brendan Lewis. And these are jobs that need to be filled imminently. There's been some talk even from some of those who stepped down. Well, if he continues or if a caretaker comes in, could they then go back to their jobs? Because we're hearing talk around Westminster. There are departments with only one minister left. There are departments where meetings can't take place, business government policies can't happen because there's no one coming into work.
Rachel Venables, we will be speaking to you again, no doubt, before Sheila Fogarty gets here at 1 o'clock. Whether or not we will hear from the Prime Minister in that time period, about 83 minutes remaining. We do not know, although the clever money at the moment suggests that we will. Something else, of course, happened yesterday. I don't know if you noticed, but he essentially conceded in the Select Committee that he had indeed met with Lebedev Sr. at the Tuscan villa without his security detail present on his way back home from a NATO summit. This shortly after, I think, the attempt to poison the Skripal family in Salisbury. And now that's an interesting revelation for a number of reasons. I mean, most obviously the security threat that it would entail. But he also claimed, and it's just kicked off, Yvette Cooper's been asking about it in the House of Commons. This is a really helpful, just to take a moment away from the fray, as it were, of the unfolding resignation, the will he, won't we. But this is huge, but it's a really useful reminder of just how awful he is as a man and as a Prime Minister. Because already today, Yvette Cooper has stood up in the House of Commons and raised the Prime Minister's admission that he met with a former KGB colonel without any officials being present. I'll say that again. He met with a former KGB colonel who's actually now been sanctioned in Canada because of his continuing proximity to Vladimir Putin. Boris Johnson, when he was Foreign Secretary, I'll say that again, when he was Foreign Secretary, met with a former KGB colonel whose proximity to Putin has now seen him sanctioned in Canada without any officials present. It's not a million miles away from what Priti Patel had to resign for when she was in Theresa May's government. So Gabby Hinsliff at The Guardian raises the, ridiculous prospect that he might stay on as a caretaker and then end up having to resign again over something else. Quite incredible. So the Foreign Office Minister, there's still a few left there apparently, Vicky Ford, suggested in the House of Commons moments ago that the Prime Minister had reported his meeting with Lebedev to officials. She's now had to correct that, because we're talking about Boris Johnson, to say that the Prime Minister thinks he reported it. Who do you expect to step forward now when it comes to really holding the feet of this ludicrous man to the fire? Yep, you got it, the MP for Rhondda, Chris Bryant, who has checked and who has found and who has reported that Boris Johnson did not register the meeting with Alexander Lebedev. He cannot have notified his officials because it's not in the FCDO published transparency records for ministers' meetings. Wow. No words. 11:40 is the time. 03456060973 is the number. Are they going to be able to wash this away? Are your Sunaks and your Javids, your Zahawis and your Bravermans, are they going to be able to wash it away? The facilitation of Boris Johnson's premiership, the forelock tugging, the cap doffing, the cheerleading of people like Oliver Dowden. I don't know is the short answer from where I'm sitting, but do we think that they can? I suspect they can. I can't see every single one of them being followed around by the stench of their collusion with Boris Johnson for the rest of their political careers. In a just universe, they'd never be able to escape that shadow. But this is not a just universe. And as I keep reminding you, it's a universe that many people still view through the profoundly distorting lens of the ludicrously biased pro-Brexit, pro-Boris Johnson right-wing media. Front page of the Daily Mail today, and I am not joking. Boris stares down the mutiny. And then page after page after page of paeans and praise. Pathetic. Duncan's in Bakewell. Duncan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Firstly, I'd just like to say thanks for being a key voice for the public over this tenure in terms of, your opinions and the opportunity that you give have been fantastic, really, for all of us who felt it. I guess the word, when you mentioned the idea of how do you feel today, because I'm not a fan of Johnson and I'm not a fan of the Conservative Party. I guess it's frustration. Frustration, firstly, because I feel I'm morbidly entertained over the past 24 hours. During his tenure, the amount of rubbish that we've had to deal with, it's almost a point where I've looked at the past 24 hours of saying, get the popcorn, have a sit down and play out to the end, of this particular point in his political career, which frustrates me because there's so much going on that's so important from an economic perspective, from in terms of social perspectives as well, from the issues of climate change and environmental crisis that we're at this situation where we have to constantly go through, and it's all due, I think, in many respects, to his relationship with the truth.
Yes. This is what Heseltine said. We forget, don't we? I think we get our faces so squashed up against the screen, we sometimes lose sight of the big picture. It's because he lies as easily as we breathe.
Exactly. And I think that you made a really good point just then about the point of the other members of his parliament who've now resigned. What does this mean for them? Can they wash off this stain, this metaphorical stain? It's to do with that truth again, because I honestly think that his lack of relationship with the truth, he's like Lionel Hutz off The Simpsons. There's that wonderful character, that attorney of law, where he says many years ago in one episode, there's the truth, and then there's the quote-unquote truth. And I think that's the way that Johnson plays this out. The interesting thing is, I don't think he understands, A, the damage that he's done to the Conservative Party, and B, the damages that he's done to the perception of politics and politicians in general, particularly with the young population, who must now think, well, if these people have already supported him, and then when all this information has come out, the truth has come out, then they have to turn coat on this. How can these individuals be trusted?
I know. How do you step down? I know. I mean, it is as if the truth has become negotiable. Speaking of which, do you think this is true or a very bad joke? Are you ready?
Yeah.
I'm hearing whispers that James Cleverly is to become the Secretary of State for Education.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's surprising. Interestingly enough, actually, when Michael Heseltine mentioned Dominic Raab as being the caretaker, my initial thought was, surely he's going to need a caretaker to oversee him in that role.
A caretaker's
caretaker.
Where
we'll be in that situation.
Even Harold Pinter didn't think of that. Oh, boy. Duncan, thank you.
The only final thing, James, I'll say is the other thing is this interesting. One final quick point is what analogy will he come out with in this resignation speech? I'm sitting at my breakfast table at the moment looking at one of my daughter's books, Mog the Forgetful Cat by Judith Kerr. And I don't know whether he'll reinforce something or draw in that kind of thing. What kind of, analogy or metaphor is he going to utilise to kind of explain his way out of this in the resignation?
We shall see. I mean, he'll try, you're right, though. He'll try and pull one of his well-established tropes out of the hat, whether it's the sort of, the cheeky, mischievous schoolboy who's been caught with his hands in the biscuit tin or whatever it is. There won't be integrity, there won't be honesty, there won't be decency, because there never was, which brings us back to all the people claiming that they've had to resign because of the sudden discovery that there was no integrity, honesty or decency in Downing Street. I don't know how they missed what was going on there for the last 3 years. I really don't. Wait, of course. I do. For the first time since 10 o'clock this morning, I have 2 phone lines free if you'd like to grab one of them. I am interested. It may be a little early to do this. And given that the resignation hasn't actually been made yet, and Boris Johnson being Boris Johnson, he might come out onto the lectern and go, ha-ha! Fooled you. I'm going nowhere. James Cleverly is Secretary of State for Education. Nadine Dorries is Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Jacob Rees-Mogg is going to be Foreign Secretary. Stranger things have happened. Seems unlikely. Kit Malthouse is the new Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster. Speaking of irredeemably awful politicians, I have to apologise to Kate Hoey, apparently, because I missed her off the list of utterly abysmal people that Boris Johnson has put in the House of Lords. So I'm very sorry, Kate Hoey, that I forgot to include you when I was listing the utterly undeserving flotsam and jetsam of British politics who have been inexplicably elevated to the House of Lords by Boris Johnson. Kate Hoey completely deserves her place on that list as one of Boris Johnson's most ridiculous and rancid legacies. 11:49 is the time. So he's making cabinet appointments. We should probably catch up on what they all are shortly, if you want me to go through it, or we'll get Rachel to do it. Greg Clark as Levelling Up Secretary. This after Michael Gove last night apparently told Boris Johnson that he had to resign by 9 o'clock and then fired Michael Gove at 8:59. I'm not going to lie to you, that actually made me smile. But it means that Greg Clark has now replaced Michael Gove as Levelling Up Secretary. Sir Keir Starmer has made a statement, which we will listen to shortly, in which he has, I think we can forgive him today for a statement of the bleeding obvious, pointed out that Boris Johnson was never suitable for high office, for public office at all. The resignation as party leader is imminent, but quite what that means in the context of a caretaker government or Boris Johnson trying to hang on is perhaps becoming clearer with these cabinet level appointments. It is unbelievable that we are still witnessing these death throes. And I imagine pretty much everybody that's called for him to go, which is now pretty much everybody except the true dregs like James Cleverly and Greg Clark, would also have called for him to go immediately. Go now. Do not hang around. But he seems set on hanging around. I'm going to play you about 3.5 minutes of the Labour leader Keir Starmer talking just a few minutes ago. 10 to 12 is the time. Let's have a listen to that.
He needs to go completely. None of this nonsense about clinging on for a few months. He's inflicted lies, fraud and chaos in the country. And, we're stuck with a government which isn't functioning in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And all of those that have been propping him up should be utterly ashamed of themselves. We've had 12 years of a stagnant economy, 12 years of broken public services, 12 years of empty promises. Enough is enough. And the change we need is not a change at the top of the Tory party. It's much more fundamental than that. We need a change of government and a fresh start for Britain.
It doesn't look like he'll get a general election if he just swaps leaders?
He needs to go. He can't cling on in this way. His own party have finally concluded that he's unfit to be Prime Minister. They can't now inflict him on the country for the next few months. It's obvious he's unfit to be Prime Minister. That's been blindingly obvious for a very, very long time. And if they don't get rid of him, then Labour will step up in the national interest and bring a vote of no confidence, because we can't go on with this Prime Minister clinging on for months and months to come.
Wouldn't that unite the Conservative Party?
I don't think anything is going to unite this Conservative Party. They're tearing each other apart. And what we've got in the middle of a cost of living crisis is a government that can't function. And that's why I say he can't cling on now. They've declared him unfit to be Prime Minister. They can't inflict him on the country for the next few months. If they don't get rid of him, we will bring that vote of no confidence in the national interest, because we can't go on with this broken government led by this discredited Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson, in some ways, was your biggest asset if you were going to go to the country. When you lose him, you will have more of a problem, won't you?
Look, the Conservative Party has been in power for 12 years. 12 years of a stagnant economy. 12 years of broken public services, 12 years of empty promises. We need a fresh start, and that's why I say changing the person at the top of the Conservative Party is not the fundamental change that we need. We need a change of government. We need a fresh start for our country.
But it doesn't look like you will get the general election you would want now, does it?
Well, we need the country's crying out for change. We've been stuck with a government that's not been functioning in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And now changing the person at the top of the Conservative Party is not going to make any difference whatsoever. People want change, a fresh start for Britain. And that means we need a change of government. We need a Labour government.
Is there nobody that you would rate as a good opponent? Someone will be in against you?
For me, this isn't a question about who leads the Conservative Party. It's much more fundamental than that. They've been in power for 12 years. Of empty promises, broken promises, a stagnant economy, wages very, very low, inflation and prices through the roof. We need fundamental change. We need a fresh start for Britain. We need a change of government. We need a Labour government.
Lastly, I just want to ask you, given what you say about the government, you haven't cut through as you might want to. How can you do something about that now?
We've come from a general election in 2019 where we did very badly, to local elections this year where we made considerable ground, and a by-election win 2 weeks ago today in Wakefield with a huge swing to the Labour Party. So we're on track, and that's why we say the change we need is a change of government, a Labour government. We're ready for that.
Thank you, Mr. Starmer.
Thank you.
Keir Starmer there.
11:54 is the time. Keir Starmer there in what is called a pooled clip, which means that it is one that is shared among all the broadcasters in the country. Back now to Downing Street, where Rachel Venables can bring us up to date with these new appointments. I mean, reshuffle seems like an inadequate word to describe what's going on now. Deck chairs on the Titanic perhaps is a little bit closer to the truth, but you better tell us who it is and what they're going to be doing.
Well, when I raced here, James, a couple of hours ago, expecting resignation day, I didn't also expect reshuffle day, but that is what's happening. Boris Johnson, inside number 10, has made a number of appointments. We know he's got a lot of spots to fill. In the past few minutes, we've heard that James Cleverly has been appointed to Education Secretary. He's replacing Michelle Donnellan, who quit after less than 2 days in the role. She who took over from Nadhim Zahawi, of course, who is now still, we understand, Chancellor. We also know that Greg Clark, as I think I mentioned to you earlier, had been rumoured, that's now confirmed. He is the new Levelling Up Secretary. He replacing Michael Gove, who was fired by Boris Johnson last night after telling the Prime Minister he needed to resign. And we also know that Kit Malthouse becomes Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster, and that is the most senior minister in the Cabinet Office after the Prime Minister.
And what happens to, I mean, I don't know if anyone knows because this is such uncharted water, but all the other appointments as well, are there going to be enough MPs left? Or will people that have called for him to go agree to be... So Zahawi stays, does he, despite having demanded the departure of the Prime Minister?
I think that's the big question, isn't it? And at the minute, we just don't know if the two of them will be prepared to work together, whether Boris Johnson is happy to continue with him as Chancellor, whether he's happy to continue as Boris Johnson's Chancellor. That's all to play for. But yesterday, certainly during the liaison committee hearings that Boris Johnson sat through for a good couple of hours, he was questioned by some MPs. Was there enough? At some point he'll run out of ministers, and he talked about how don't underestimate the wealth of talent in the Tory party. He clearly is eyeing up from the backbenches other people to take those roles, and he believes that he's got enough people available to fill those spots to allow him to cling on for, I think in his mind, the next couple of months.
And yet the clamour seems to be, the sources seem to be saying that nobody really wants him to hang on until October, except, I suppose, the people that he's now promoting way beyond their capabilities, although I wouldn't expect to comment on the last bit. The lobby is reporting pretty widely that Conservative MPs are queuing up to tell them that they want him gone now. They want him gone yesterday. They don't want him hanging around until October.
Well, one of the biggest challenges, and one of the things he has to be able to demonstrate to the country, to the Queen, to Parliament, is that he's got a functioning government. So first and foremost, he is trying to back up with cabinet ministers, the men and women really who will help him run the country. The secondary point, I think it might be, you could say to that, is of course he's got the MPs to support him, and that's where this line from Sir Keir Starmer talking about a vote of no confidence in Parliament becomes very interesting, because that is where enough of his MPs could turn against him, and that could force his hand far sooner than he wants.
Rachel Venables, we'll talk again. Beth Rigby's just reported that the speech is expected at 12:30, so keep an eye out for that lectern. Beth Rigby, of course, the political editor at Sky News. Again, Rachel won't thank me for it, but she has stepped into the breach this week in a characteristically professional and brilliant fashion. Our staff political reporters not available for different reasons. Theo's been a bit poorly, as he shared with you on Twitter yesterday, although I think he did manage to break his purdah to speak to Sheila Fogarty. And Ben Kentish on scheduled annual leave, which has meant Rachel's had to pick up the baton. But my goodness me, she has run with it in a expected but brilliant fashion. And some of those new appointments, we've got James Cleverly to Education, as she just told us. The former Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, has been made Welsh Secretary. I don't get this bit, I got to be honest with you. I just don't understand, and I'm a fairly well travelled chronicler of Boris Johnson's madness, but I don't get this. I don't see what this is designed to achieve, unless it is as pathetic as having his eye on the calendar and being desperate to appear on Wikipedia for the rest of his life as having been in post for a few days longer than Theresa May. It's the only reason I can really think of. He can't seriously be contemplating a possible reverse, as if he can hang on for another couple of months after resigning, then he might somehow be able to unresign. I think even by the standards of Boris Johnson's madness, that would not be in his head. So all I've got now is that he is desperate to hang on longer than Neville Chamberlain did, which means at least another 48 hours. The question of, I mean, listen, what about people who are a bit like the voter equivalent of these MPs, these ministers? I feel I haven't made you feel properly welcome yet. So if you are, I don't know, wondering how on earth you ever fell for it, I don't know whether these ministers are or not, but the question of how it feels to have the sort of picture on your wall taken down, and how it feels to have had your regard for the man completely trashed. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. I'm going to be speaking to the leader of the Liberal Democrats, hopefully, Ed Davey, shortly. But before that, let's go to Peter, who's in Fairford in Gloucestershire. Peter, what made you pick up the phone?
James, thanks very much for taking my call on what's a very historic day, I think.
Yes.
Going to what you've just said about what he's doing, I'm wondering whether he's just waiting for another emergency to happen, or waiting just, the way he thinks of just get through this interview, just get through this crisis, just get through this lie. It's just waiting to see if something else happens that might take him out of this.
I mean, that's the fear with him. And even after all these years, and even after all these experiences of the opposite, you still have a voice. I don't know if you do. I still find myself thinking, well, he couldn't actually be that corrupt, or whatever the correct word is. He couldn't actually be that craven. He couldn't be that. But of course he could, couldn't he? He could be thinking somewhere inside, I'll see this one through, because he can never admit the truth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, going on your analogy of a house fire, it is out, but can we ever repair the damage? Because what I've been feeling today is, there's still people yesterday screaming that they liked Boris Johnson.
Well, hold that thought. I'll come back to you if I can, because Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, is on College Green, where no doubt there is something of a scrum underway, and he joins me now. It's an odd question, Ed, but I'll begin with it, if I may. How are you feeling right now?
Well, I'm feeling that this is the right thing for the country and our politics. I mean, Liberal Democrats have called for Boris Johnson to go for months and months and months, and we've been increasingly angry that the Conservatives have just kept him there. And frankly, the whole Conservative Party is to blame for this chaos. They put him there in the first place. They propped him up, even though he was lying and law-breaking and incompetent. And the fact we've got, millions of families and pensioners facing cost of living emergency, and they've been totally incompetent in dealing with that. We've got the NHS in crisis, record waiting times for cancer, for ambulances, for GPs. They are failing our country. And so it's not just about Boris Johnson, James, it's about the whole Conservative Party. And
this is not a criticism that anyone could level at you or indeed at Keir Starmer, but the sense of suddenness, the scales have fallen from eyes with amazing speed, because as you've just alluded to, he told us who he was a very, very long time ago, and some of us believed him. Lots of people didn't. These are your colleagues, quite possibly even your friends, who have facilitated and been cheerleaders for this man, who have all of a sudden seen what you have been describing to them all along. How are you responding to that discovery?
Well, James, it's not a discovery. Many of us have watched this man throughout his career, when he was Mayor of London, before he was Mayor of London, and then, of course, through the torrid time of his being a hopeless Foreign Secretary, and then as a Prime Minister. And they knew what he was like. They've been complicit in the lie to the British people. The British people have been taken for fools by the Conservatives, and they've allowed policies to continue for years now that have taken people for granted, taken people for fools. And there needs to be an awful lot of Tory MPs actually being held to account, first of all, the election and bring it on, but actually held to account. They should apologise. They should apologise for the lies that they went along with. I mean, James, they kept coming in front of the TV, 4 radio microphones, and parroting the lies, defending him, when they knew that it was a lie. They've debased our politics.
They have. And I was just trying to nudge you towards a more personal as opposed to political response, because these people are your colleagues. And I spoke to Chris Bryant about it last week, and he talks about the people who will clutch their pearls in private, but who in public will continue to do what you describe. Has it shaken your faith in Parliament? Because some of the people you're talking about now will be on your Christmas card list, Ed Davey. They will be people with whom you've broken bread or enjoyed a convivial glass on the terrace, and yet they've done the things that you describe rightly in fairly despicable terms.
Yeah, well, to be honest, those Conservatives who I might send and receive Christmas cards from, most of them were thrown out of the Conservative Party by Boris Johnson. Let's remember, this isn't the Conservative Party that many Conservatives have voted for. Lifelong Conservatives are now realising this is a Conservative Party that's very different. This is Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. And even when Boris Johnson goes, it will still be Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. Many of the people accept that his style of politics, his beliefs, anything goes, and I'm afraid that's why the Conservative Party needs to get voted out of office.
Well, yeah, but it's not going to happen anytime soon, and this cabinet reshuffle suggests that Johnson is doing what Johnson does, which is playing for time, even in these remarkable circumstances. Let me bring the ghost of Dominic Cummings to proceedings and tell you what he's said in the last half hour. He says, I know the guy, and I'm telling you, he doesn't think it's over. He's thinking there's a war, weird stuff happens in a war, play for time, I can still get out of this, I've got a mandate, members love me, get me to September. And Cummings warns that if MPs do leave him in situ, there will be carnage. Are you worried about this possibility of him trying to coin a phrase, style it out?
Well, I'm not a fan of Dominic Cummings.
Well, no, you and me both. But even a stopped clock is right twice a day, Ed.
Yeah, well, he does know. You've got to say he does know Boris Johnson well, having worked with him so much, and so he should be listened to, I guess, on this at least. I mean, that is my worry. I mean, the idea of Boris Johnson as a caretaker prime minister, I mean, it's ludicrous.
It's obviously happening, though. The reshuffle is going to be doing cabinet at 3 o'clock with 5 people who have called for him to go.
A caretaker who's not cared about anything in his life except himself, right? That's what we've got. And, you know, if the Tories go along with that, well, shame on them. If they allow him to stay in office one more hour, one more day, well, they need to carry the blame for that as well. And I think the Conservative Party need to have it hung around their necks. They allowed him to get into place in the first place. They've allowed him to stay in power for so long. And if they allow him to stay now, I mean, you know, we need leadership. The country's in crisis. I think an interim Conservative government, while they choose their next leader, is a much better prospect if it doesn't have Boris Johnson in it.
Sorry, David, leader of... Oh, hang on, one more. Surely your chances of repeating Tiverton and Honiton and building upon these amazing gains that you've made in by-elections recently, surely those chances are enhanced by having Johnson in Downing Street. I mean, I appreciate it's a price you're probably willing to pay, but it is going to change the game slightly.
Well, you know, James, a lot of people have been saying that to me and asking that question, but they should have knocked on the doors that I knocked in Cheshire, Amersham and North Shropshire and Tiverton and Honiton, where we beat the Tories in their homelands. And there were some lifelong Conservatives, absolutely, who wanted Boris Johnson to go and hoped the Conservative Party would go back to what they used to remember. But there were a whole lot of other lifelong Tories who blame the Conservative Party, because it's not just the last 2 years of Boris Johnson as a Premier, but they've seen Conservative MPs, Conservative councils, Conservative councillors take them and their communities for granted for years. And I think they've worked it out now. And if Liberal Democrats can go out there, put out constructive, positive alternative, show that we can have the real champions for their communities, I think we can still win lots of seats off the Tories. We will win lots of seats off the Tories.
Sir Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, many thanks indeed. I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but I think Steve Bray might have got his loudspeaker back, judging by some of the noise in the background down there on College Green. And I mean, remarkably, as I just mentioned there, you've got a cabinet scheduled for 3 o'clock, at which 5 people sitting around the table told the Prime Minister yesterday that he should resign. And yet this caretaker cabinet is coming into place. And you know the opinion I hold about Dominic Cummings. I've made no bones about it. I mean, it's a little childish, but I do rather like the fact that I clearly live, as they say, rent-free in his head. But even a stop clock is right twice a day, and he does have knowledge of Boris Johnson's modus operandi, and it is the modus operandi of a narcissist. I mean, there's a diagnostic handbook explaining how this sort of thing unfolds, and the mindset of the narcissist is damage control mode, not, as Emma points out in a message, not packing up mode. He will be thinking, hang in there, keep me in place, things might turn around, and that is exactly what Dominic Cummings has just warned about. I don't know what the Tories do to get him out now. I mean, presumably it would have to unfold on the floor of the actual House of Commons. A confidence vote that Keir Starmer is talking about bringing, or people walking across the floor? Gary in Suffolk's very unhappy. He says, where is James O'Brien's Mystery Hour? I've tuned in and all I can hear is people droning on about politics. Gary, I don't know whether your tongue is in your cheek, but, Ian Warrington says, I've got a question for Mystery Hour, James. Is he still there? To which the answer is actually yes, although he is due, of course, to appear on the steps of Downing Street in the next 20 minutes or so. And a quick word from the clown corner. Gary's in Cornwall. He goes, you have blood on your hands when it comes to Boris's downfall. You are so unprofessional and narrow-minded, it's disgusting. You shouldn't ever be able to air your one-sided point views ever again. You're nothing but a bully. No prizes for guessing how your is spelt. And at least you can put the downfall on your CV. Gary, mate, come here. Go and sit down, ideally in a darkened room. Take 10 minutes, all right? Just breathe deeply. Give your head a little wobble. And then turn the lights back on. Get out your bank statements. Get out your utility bills. Have a little look around. Check out what's going to happen to GDP. Have a little look at what the multiple sectors are telling us about their workforce problems. Have a little look at the situation in Northern Ireland. Focus on what the OECD have said is likely to happen to our economy next year. Wonder why the only country predicted to do worse than us has had economic sanctions imposed upon it from outside, while the one led by Boris Johnson has imposed economic sanctions on itself. And listen, I'm being a bit brutal, but I do mean this most sincerely, Gary. And then have a little think and ask yourself why you support him. Ask yourself why you're sad that he's going. Just make a little list and text me back, all right? You're not allowed to parrot lies about vaccine rollouts or nonsense about Ukraine, okay? And obviously you can't claim that he got Brexit done because they're now threatening to break international law in order to get it undone. So we'll take those three complete canards off the table, mate. Just because I think this will be quite liberating for you. I think if you really do this, depending on how hard the wobble is that you give to your head, if you really do this, you're going to be able to sort of think of me as sucking the venom out of the snake bite that Boris Johnson has administered to you over the last few years. Because if you do the things I've just suggested that you do, I think you'll feel a great burden lift from your shoulders and you'll think, God, he's right. Why am I cross or sad about this? This is actually great news. So just to run through it again, go and sit down in a darkened room, take 10 minutes of deep breathing, then give your head a wobble, turn the lights back on, get your bank statements out, get your utility bills out, have a little look at how your personal financial situation is, then get online, have a little look at what all of the most august institutions in the world are saying about the British economy, including the British government's own analyses. Ask yourself why, from farms to airlines, there are huge job shortages in this country. Have a little look at the countries that have also dealt with COVID that aren't dealing with any of the problems or anything like the scale of the problems that we're dealing with. And then seriously, just say to yourself, why do I like this guy? Why do I support this guy? Why am I cross with James, who I wrongly think has played any sort of significant part in Johnson's self-immolation? And if you ask yourself that question, I honestly think that you'll be free of this ludicrous mindset that you've boxed yourself into. And you know what? You don't even have to thank me later. And this could be it. I don't think we'll take another break, and we probably won't take the headlines at 12:30 because we are expecting Boris Johnson to step onto the tarmac outside Downing Street and deliver his resignation speech, although I have to tell you that there are now whispers that worries in number 10 about him going off message and departing from the script that has now been agreed. Pippa Crerar of the Mirror reporting that he's tweaking the statement, and there are now worries that he might go off message, which is just giving me a tiny pause on the comments I made at the top of the show about yesterday looking briefly as if we might discover what the British equivalent of the January the 6th coup attempt is. Just, and listen, don't have kittens. I mean, that sounds much more portentous than I intend. There won't be a coup attempt in the sense of an armed mob storming Downing Street or anything like that, or storming Parliament. But prompted by, in the case of January the 6th, prompted by the President. Tom Swarbrick's just tweeted rather cleverly, what's the betting that Johnson's statement will make things worse? It's a neat distillation of my thoughts at the moment. What would desperate self-interest look like in the current context? I think we've spent 2.5 hours, or the best part thereof, presuming that the desperate self-interest has actually expired. But it will never expire. And that comment from Cummings adds to the idea that he will be doing what he always does, which is just cling on there, hoping that the tide goes back out again. Unbelievable. Peter was cut off in his prime for Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. Talk to me, if you would, Peter, about these people trying to wash their hands in public. My fear is that they're going to get away with it.
I think so, and I suppose my worry is that the public are going to carry on believing them, because yesterday, to me, it was clear as day that this was it, that, you know, he'd been caught lying, there was nowhere else to go, but there were still people saying he's got Brexit done, he's given us the vaccines, he gets things done. Oh, I wouldn't want his job. Would you want to be his job? And I'm like, well, no, but, you know, if you're going to take that job, you need to take responsibility for what you do, and he's never, ever done that.
How will we know? How will we tell? I mean, we might know some. I obviously get a lot of messages like this one from Nate, who's in Edinburgh. I fell for the lies in 2019, regretted it within 6 months, mistakenly thought he would rise to the occasion. Today feels like a cleansing of the sin watching him flounder founder. It's the last hours of the Führer bunker. It'll hurt him more than a general election, but I still feel like I need to do something to make up for it. I'm looking forward to voting Labour next time round, assuming that Keir Starmer is still there. I mean, how are we going to know? Some polling will appear, but it won't address directly the question of regret. Oh, hang on. The lectern is being wheeled out, Peter. The lectern is being wheeled out.
It's going to happen.
Wow. How are we going to know whether or not people like the ones you described?
It's only going to be during a general election. That's the only time that we're really going to find out. And as you said yesterday, I think it was another caller, that things, they kind of calmed down. And, people were saying about keeping him in place and then he'll face Keir Starmer in the general election. But by then, they've sort of been forgotten. People forget things. And it's no longer that fresh news story anymore. It's now something else. And I think the only way we can really find out for sure is to go for a general election. But I think what we need to do is stop talking about the Conservative Party and start talking about this Conservative Party.
Yes, that's a good point.
Looking at Rory Stewart, this isn't his Conservative Party at all. And I think we need to remember that we don't want, like with Brexit, say to people, well, that was wrong and all Brexiteers are, are racist, because it's like saying this Conservative Party, all the Conservatives are wrong, and it's not. It's this Conservative, this...
Yes, I mentioned yesterday I've never been able to get on board with Aneurin Bevan's description of the Conservative Party as being collectively and completely lower than vermin. I mean, whether or not it's because of my own sort of friendship circle or job, I don't know, but they're nowhere near all as awful as this current iteration. And I think history, hopefully, will judge harshest the ones who are taking jobs now. Do you know, when I was at school, the head of house resigned. And it was unheard of. It was the final nail in the coffin, actually, of the housemaster's career. If you can't find out, and everyone agreed before he resigned that no one would take the job. We were absolutely fascinated to see what would happen there. And of course, someone did take the job. Let's go to Rachel Venables, who's outside Downing Street, where it looks as if things are likely to happen sooner rather than later, Rachel. This is where Nick Ferrari, were he here, would say we can get a man on the moon, but we can't get a line a mile and a half down the road. So Rachel's just dropped. People talking about defiance, probably expected. Boris Johnson will talk about still having a job to do. The fact that literally nobody wants him to carry on doing the job, or next to nobody wants him to carry on doing the job, probably won't touch the size of his self-regard. There's quite a crowd gathering at the gates of Downing Street. A little bit of history due to unfold in front of us. Staff have gathered now outside, which is a sort of traditional mark of the end of the era. MPs, I beg your pardon, not staff gathering. Not the largest grouping that you've ever seen at a prime ministerial resignation, but there are a few people there, very few of whom I can recognise, which is probably a mark of who has stayed loyal to Boris Johnson. And we will be crossing live any minute now, probably in the next 5 minutes, to Downing Street. OK, Rachel Venables is there now. It's definitely happening, and it's happening sooner rather than later, Rachel.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of stress and excitement here. You'll be able to hear behind me the photographers liaising with the Downing Street team about the exact placement of the lectern in front of that black door to number 10 Downing Street. In the past few minutes, to my left, out of number 11, a number of basically the number 10 team, so PPSs, the remaining staff who still work here, they all came out and they're lined up now on the street facing the lectern, waiting for the moment that Boris Johnson arrives. And then to my right, as I look down, I can see yet more men and women stood out watching again, so they're clearly expecting an announcement any minute from the Prime Minister. He, of course, having just announced some key new positions as he reshuffles his cabinet. Though we're expecting this to be a resignation statement of sorts, talking about his departure as Conservative Party leader.
Indeed. And that cabinet reshuffle, so to speak, suggesting that he certainly is intending to be a caretaker who, as Ed Davey told us a few moments ago, who has never cared for anybody in his life, or never taken care of anybody in his life. We're talking minutes, are we, Rachel? We're talking, or even seconds, because if the staff have gathered outside, then he's essentially waiting in the porch for the get-go. So 12:30 on the dot, do we think? which has been distracted. 12:26 is the time. The technology that presumably because of the weight of bandwidth being deployed by all the other broadcasters in the area, it's a bit like trying to get a mobile phone signal at a concert. Speaking of which, I'm off to see Olivia Rodrigo tonight, which will be a rather nice bit of light relief from proceedings. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of an hour in Miriam Margoliz's company, which was a beautiful distraction from the skip fire of British politics, and which you'll be able to hear when we drop the latest episode of Full Disclosure tomorrow. I'll start talking to Veronica in Dorchester, but with the warning, Veronica, that I may cut you off in your prime to cross live to Downing Street, where Boris Johnson is expected to speak imminently. What would you like to say? Why did you pick up the phone today?
Hi, James.
Hello.
No problem. I was calling, I actually called before Keir Starmer came on, but I think his statement is radically underestimating the damage Johnson's premiership has done. What these last few years have done, both here and in the States with Trump, is show how gossamer thin the strands holding our democracy together are. As both leaders have shown more and more, have gone more and more off script, and their lies have become more and more blatant. We've slowly had to acknowledge that democracy only works when everyone believes it works. These corrupt leaders have highlighted how there are no mechanisms to remove them if they don't want to go.
Well, I mean, or certainly they will resist all of the mechanisms furiously. I mean, I presume, whether he realises it or not, that Boris Johnson has run out of road. But the tragedy you describe, or the horror you describe, is what can happen when they don't realise or they refuse to accept that they've run out of road. We saw January the 6th in America, and we are yesterday flirting with a British version of that. And now, as we wait to see what he's actually going to say when he comes out, we could be discovering what the British version looks like.
I certainly think one of the true frightening elements, both with Trump and with Johnson, who are so similar in many ways.
I still balk at that, you know. I think out of exceptionalism or patriotism, or call it what you will, I still balk slightly at the version that we've got our own.
I think in terms of their personality types, both of them have no interest in exercising power. Neither of them really wanted to do anything on a foreign with foreign state, or they didn't want to do anything with domestic policy. What they wanted was the title. I want to be Prime Minister.
The constant inflation of the cult of personality that propelled them into power in the first place. Veronica, thank you. I'm very conscious of the time and indeed of the gathering crowd outside Downing Street. Rachel Venables remains a part of it. I don't think we've ever done any of these professional broadcast space fills together, Rachel. They're great fun, aren't they?
About James, a number of politicians have just walked out of number 11, including Jacob Rees-Mogg. I can see easiest spot over the crowd. He's right at the front, and actually there's Carrie Johnson, the Prime Minister's wife, has just walked out as well. I think that's Nadine Dorries behind her. So I think we are pretty much moments away now from Boris Johnson coming out of number 10 Downing Street, standing at the lectern, the podium which has been put up, and addressing the nation. But they're all lined out now. As I said, I mentioned yesterday, Nadine Dorries.
That's Ben Elliott next to Carrie Johnson, the chairman of the party, who, of course, runs that odd concierge company that does so much business in Russia. So he's still there. They're not exactly household faces, are they? I mean, I can recognise those three, but the rest of them, I wouldn't know from Adam or Eve.
No, it's been tricky. From my vantage point as well, I have to admit, you've probably got a better view on the TV cameras than I do. I can also see, as I look up, actually, interestingly, at number 10 and number 11, you can see people peering out, and there it is, the front door open, Boris Johnson approaching the mic.
The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is about to address the nation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place. So I want to say to the millions of people who voted for us in 2019, many of them voting Conservative for the first time, thank you for that incredible mandate, the biggest Conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. And the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019. And of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And let me say now to the people of Ukraine that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And at the same time, in this country, we've been pushing forward a vast program of investment in infrastructure and skills and technology, the biggest in a century, because if I have one insight into human beings, it is that genius and talent and enthusiasm and imagination are evenly distributed throughout the population, but opportunity is not. And that's why we must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom. And if we can do that in this country, we will be the most prosperous in Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much, and when we have such a vast mandate, and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward through tough times, not just helping families to get through it, but changing and improving the way we do things, cutting burdens on businesses and families, and yes, cutting taxes, because that is the way to generate the growth and the income we need to pay for great public services. And to that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. I want to thank Carrie and our children and all the members of my family who have had to put up with so much for so long. I want to thank the peerless British civil service for all the help and support that you have given our police, our emergency services, and of course our fantastic NHS, who at critical moment helped to extend my own period in office, as well as our armed services and our agencies that are so admired around the world, and our indefatigable Conservative Party members and supporters whose selfless campaigning makes our democracy possible. I want to thank the wonderful staff here at Chequers, here at Number 10, and of course at Chequers, and our fantastic prop force detectives, the one group, by the way, who never leak. Above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways, that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
So there it is. Or is it? He will remain in post while the business of finding a new leader unfolds, something which I think a majority of Conservative MPs do not want to happen. But since when did Boris Johnson care about what other people want? That was abysmal. I wish I didn't feel that way. Even now, you want to retain respect for the office, even if the holder of it is completely beneath contempt. But there was not a single syllable of contrition, apology, or acknowledgement of the behaviours that have brought him to this pass. It was almost as if Boris Johnson was complaining that he's been unfairly treated, that the MPs who have decided they can no longer tolerate his lies and his base deceptions are unreasonable or unworthy of passing judgment upon the great Boris Johnson himself. Not a single reference to the lies, not a mention of the Deputy Chief Whip, whose promotion, despite the Prime Minister knowing of the allegations of misconduct, I finally did for him. Not a mention of the colleagues who've walked away. Quite an incredible narcissistic display from Boris Johnson. And what else would you expect? Absolutely unbelievable that even then and even there, he still casts himself as a victim. Poor me. Pour me a drink. Boris Johnson, right until the last, demonstrating levels of self-obsession that even in the crucible of politics are absolutely off the scale. So I don't know exactly what happens next, and I don't think it would be fair to pin Rachel Venables down immediately on this question, but the leadership campaigns for various candidates begin in earnest, and the 22 committee, I think, presides over the process. So when that process is likely to end will be certainly in time for the next Conservative Party conference, which is due in October, but it means we could be spending the whole of autumn with the most ridiculous regime imaginable in place. And I thought the last one, which he also headed up, was the most ridiculous regime imaginable. 12:39 is the time. Rachel Venables is, I think, still on the line, so we will cross to her. And something of a damp squib in the end, Rachel, but the fears among many Conservatives that he would cling on for longer than they wanted him to seem to have been realised. There'll be a cabinet in 2 hours and 20-minute time. Around the table, 5 people who've called for him to go immediately will be sitting. I suppose the top line is he's not going immediately.
He's not going immediately, but he is going soon. That was Boris Johnson's message to the nation, as you mentioned, rather snappy message. It was rather buoyant. I think if you weren't to have listened to the words, but instead seen the face of the man, the way he projected, the way he spoke, you wouldn't have thought that this was a man who's just been told by, more than 50 of his own ministers and junior ministers and secretaries of state that he's got to go, that his own party are clamouring to have him leave. Instead, he seemed rather optimistic. The line, I think, that really stuck with me was, "Them's the breaks." That's what he said. It was
very Churchillian, that, Rachel. Let's not forget his great ambition to emulate Winston Churchill. Them's the breaks.
Them's the breaks. And so different. I sat here, I think, 2.5 odd years ago when Theresa May made what was the equivalent speech, announcing that she was on the way out. And do you remember her voice broke at that moment when she talked about how proud she was to have served the country she loved? And it looked as though she was choking up and starting to cry. Boris Johnson could not have been more different to his predecessor in that statement there. I don't know if you picked up in the background, there were jeers and boos from a huge number of men and women, a crowd who gathered just outside the gates of Downing Street. I believe it was Steve Gray playing out over the loudspeaker, bye Boris. But he wasn't fazed. He delivered that speech. He was applauded by members, the new members and the old members of his cabinet, the ones still there. Carrie Johnson, his wife, on the sidelines as well, supporting her husband with their new baby daughter in tow. She was holding on to her. Boris Johnson now back in Downing Street, back at number 10 for now, to continue governing, while the Tory party begins the job of trying to replace him.
And that is a process which takes weeks. not days.
Weeks to months. I mean, it depends. I think this is going to be a huge battle now behind the scenes. There'll be people who want this to go very quickly. There'll be people, Boris Johnson and his allies, you can assume, who'll want to drag it out until October. We do not know yet what the timeline is going to be. I think that's going to be thrashed out imminently. In the meantime, he, as far as he's concerned, is staying in number 10. The question is, will that happen, or will there be more moves to move him sooner?
Rachel Venables, many thanks, and thank you once again for stepping into the breach in this most remarkable of weeks. Sun reporter Noah Hoffman, who's done some cracking work over the last few weeks, I think she's relatively new to the job, has just tweeted that a senior government source has messaged her to say that speech was and then a word I can't say on the radio under Ofcom regulations, that speech was an effing disgrace. And my initial instinct that was absolutely shocking. Not a word of apology. Graceless, vain, self-serving, narcissistic, and utterly devoid of repentance, contrition, or apology. Not to mention, utterly devoid of any reference at all to the lies and the unravellings that have led him to this point. But I am a relative newcomer when it comes to analysing politics, and Andrew Marr is not. My colleague and of course with you live on LBC at 6 o'clock this evening joins me now. Gives a gut-shot reaction, if you would, to that remarkable the resignation speech that never used the word resign, I think, Andrew.
Well, I think in one sense, James, unremarkable. It was the Boris Johnson we've come to know. It was exactly what you would have written for him if you'd been script writing for him. Not a likely thought, I know, but it's exactly what you'd have expected in terms of tone. I think there is one really, really important and urgent unresolved issue there. I was talking to some very senior members of the 1922 committee of backbenchers. They're the ones who would have ousted him had he not gone today, and they're the ones who will have to meet him shortly to discuss the process of choosing a new leader. And they are unequivocal that they do not want him to stay on as a caretaker prime minister. They want him to pass the baton to somebody. It might be Dominic Raab, it might be somebody else, and now to go. They say he cannot take any further substantive or important decisions now as prime minister. It is over. So there's a real argument to be had there. He clearly intends to stay on till the autumn, when of course the party conference comes. Is he thinking one great final farewell at the party conference, a sobbing, contrite, buyer's remorse gathering of the Conservative Party, and maybe, who knows, another turn in the story? They don't want that to happen, of course. Their argument is that in the next 2 weeks they have time, however brutal and however fast it'll be, to select a final 2 candidates to take over from him. They then go to the party in the country. That's all the Conservative members in the country who get to choose in the final runoff, and that will take August.
Right.
So their argument is that certainly by the mid to late September, possibly even by the beginning of September, there could be a new Conservative leader in post, and that person will certainly oust Boris Johnson immediately from number 10. But their argument is that is too long for him to be there. For the rest of this month and through August is too long, and somebody else needs to take over, and he should hand the baton right now to Raab. And that's where the argument, I think, is going to be.
I mean, and it won't be a pretty argument, will it? I mean,
no, it won't.
It's cornered rat territory yet again. What does leverage look like then? What can be brought to bear? Because we've had a crash course in what a government abandonment looks like over the last couple of days. What weapons are left in the arsenal of the 22 and of colleagues past and present who are desperate to see him walking out of the door today?
Well, frankly, it's a collection of rather musty old muskets and damp powder, I think. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he's still Prime Minister in name, and he has that huge kind of machine under his bottom and with his hands on the levers, and they don't. All they can do is produce a new leader as quickly as possible. The new leader is then the Prime Minister. That will happen very quickly when it happens.
Right.
But they don't. They can't really threaten him with anything. I can't think of anything they could possibly threaten him with. There are more stories. You were talking about the Lebedev story. Yes. I think the Lebedev story is one of the really, really important ones. And MPs, by the way, in the Commons this morning are all talking about that. So there could be a question of whether there are further scandals to come out and so on. But no, I don't think they have got many Except, of course, they can dangle even now that thought that he could leave in a sort of dignified manner, thanked by the Conservative Party and not dividing it. Does he really want a divided, rancorous and still angry Conservative Party when he hands over, or does he want one where the process of healing has begun? And some people who are his biggest critics are saying, well, we heard in that speech, a very quick playlist of the familiar greatest hits, Brexit and the pandemic and the vaccine rollout and Ukraine and so on. And it would still be possible for leading Tories to put together a kind of, he had his faults, but he took us through this period and he did that. And if he wants that to be the Tory narrative, then he can't rile them too much.
Okay.
But that's as much as the ammunition as they've got, I think.
Apart from a sort of valedictory lap of honour at conference in October, what other reason could there be for him refusing to do what the party clearly wants him to do? I mean, are there any other reasons behind it apart from vanity or almost reality denial?
Well, this is what's really dangerous for the Conservative Party, because let me give an example. Let's say the Russians launch a new missile attack which hits Kyiv, and there's a huge eruption of emotion around the world about Ukraine on its back, fighting desperately for its survival. And Johnson, next month, while still Prime Minister, goes there and is warmly embraced by an exhausted and shattered-looking President Zelensky. And then he comes back and he says to the Conservative Party, there's nobody else. Zelensky comes to the Conservative conference and says, there is nobody else in the Western world who's given me the kind of support that Boris Johnson did. Are you really sure you want to get rid of this man? Is it possible, even then, there'll be some kind of last-minute change of heart by enough people? I don't know. The answer is no, it isn't possible, but he might be thinking of that. He might be dreaming of that. That process itself rips the Conservative Party in two, and that's what they're frightened of.
And I mean, that tallies with some of Dominic Cummings' warnings today as well.
It certainly does.
That idea that he will have... If we had to write a headline then, Andrew Marr, I suppose it would have to be leave doesn't mean leave.
Leave doesn't mean leave. Get leave done. Get Dexit done.
Brexit. Well, Andrew will be with us, with you indeed at 6 o'clock tonight and every evening on LBC. Many thanks indeed for that. The question, of course, remains of what is he playing at? But I don't think now is the moment for that. Oddly, I can't do fully or completely what I wanted to do, which is the sort of post-mortem, if you like, or the epitaphs, because he is clinging on. He is ignoring the advice, ignoring the pleas of colleagues. He is doing what he has always done, which is precisely what he wanted. The option of not resigning taken away from him, but the option to resign half-heartedly, very much embraced, as you would expect, by Boris Johnson, a man who has never in his life thought of anybody's welfare but his own. So it's not actually end of an era now for the final 10 minutes of the programme. It is instead, how do you respond to that dampish squib of a resignation, that wriggle, if you like, that ravel, as opposed to what every other Prime Minister has done in similar circumstances and drawn a very clear line under their premiership. As Andrew Marr suggests, and as Dominic Cummings has attested today, he will be thinking of some sort of escape route, some sort of secret passage back to the premiership. And I think we've talked about him enough on this programme to believe that that is true. But how ironic that, for now at least, the phrase under which Boris Johnson's career is finally coming to an end is leave doesn't mean leave. Respond to that statement if you wish on 03456060973. Sheila Fogarty will be with you shortly. The decision of the Prime Minister to continue until a new leader is elected is in many ways the worst case scenario for the Conservative Party and by association, of course, for the country as well. But there it is. Be interesting to see what the newspapers do tomorrow with response to this, even the ones that up until this very morning were pretending that he was anything other than on the way out of the door. I'd be very interested to see whether or not this latest contortion undertaken by Boris Johnson receives support from the people who do deserve Tanya's description earlier of client media, which would be the editor of the Daily Mail or the political editor of the Sun and the rest of them. We'll only find out, of course, in the morning. But if you want to have a quick response to that, 03456060973 is the number that you need. Jock's not happy. You cancelled Mystery Hour for that, he writes. Can I have the unused board game then? No, you can't, you cheeky beggar. Rob's in Sheffield. Rob, what did you make of all that then?
I am angry and I am sad.
Yes.
I am angry. I am angry because he has not apologised for one of the things which has got him to this position.
Not a single one. Not a single syllable of apology or contrition. That's incredible, right?
He has not apologised for the PP scandals. He has not apologised for the sleaze and corruption which led to the resignation of Owen Paterson. He has not apologised for not dealing with the sexual harassment which led to the wins in Wakefield and Tifton and Honiton. He has not apologised for what led him to this point, which was the protection of Chris Pincher.
Yeah. No, you're right.
He has not said a word. He has bumbled on like he always has, patting himself on the back, going, "Ooh, aren't I brilliant? Vaccines." But I'm sad because I know whether he goes tomorrow or he goes in October, the person who comes up next will be no way better.
I'm not so sure.
No, the Conservative Party has moved in one direction.
That's
and
true.
I've been seeing a lot of Theresa May revisionism all over she's sitting high and mighty. She was the one that introduced this hostile environment. She was the one who led to the Windrush scandal.
You're absolutely right.
And people are looking at her going, wasn't she a brilliant Prime Minister? She was awful, but she was protected by her statesmanship. Boris Johnson did not have that. And whoever takes over from Boris Johnson will be a damn sight better at protecting and hiding it. His buffoonery has led him to this position. There are people taking over who are just as vicious as him, but they're better at hiding it.
Wow. I mean, it's a much bleaker analysis than Michael Heseltine's. I thought he was possibly over-optimistic, but you, I hope, are being overly pessimistic.
And there are 2 years until they need to have a general election.
Yeah.
And that is 2 years. Think what they've done in the last 2 years.
Yeah, of course.
And
look at what Gordon Brown did. There's no reason why they'd go to the country immediately until they felt they had a decent chance. Sadness and anger, remarkably. Could he have delivered a speech that would have addressed either of those emotions? Could you have been less angry and less sad if he had said, I'm sorry, the game is up?
The speech which would have made me happy is, I am sorry and I'm calling a general election. Because it will show that he is recognised.
But no, I think you have to give them a chance to put a leader in place before you have an actual general. I mean, to be fair to decent Conservatives such as they are, you can't call a general election when there's no one in the driving seat. I don't think.
Oh, but I don't care. I don't see a Conservative Party that is going to do anything to benefit this country in the next 2 years.
No, I hope you are proved wrong, although obviously I doubt it. I'm told that other broadcasters, foreign broadcasters, CNN, Malcolm Bodmin has got on in the background, are absolutely scathing about Johnson's outrageous speech. Even then, even in the final throes of his administration, the man's gracelessness and vanity are absolutely off the scale. Not a single syllable of apology, not a single syllable of contrition, not a single syllable of acknowledgement of the behaviours and the lies that have brought him to this point. I'm actually staggered. I'll never stop, will I? He'll always still be capable of surprising me with his depravity and his awfulness. I don't know why that is, but I'm glad I'm built that way. I wouldn't want to be built the other way, always expecting the worst. It'd be a glum and a gloomy way to live your life, always believing the best in people, always thinking they're capable of improvement or redemption. It's probably the Catholic in me, isn't it? But if anyone was going to challenge that sort of spiritual optimism, it would be someone as utterly devoid of decency as Boris Johnson. Hayley is in Lancaster. Hayley, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. First of all, I just want to say thank you for helping to make sense of this mess for a listener like me.
Well, thank you. That's a lovely thing to say.
No, the second thing is, I don't really understand how, given everything that's happened, given everything we all know about, that he was challenged on. He's been challenged on time and again at PMQs. I mean, even yesterday, that his resignation speech could refer to absolutely none of that. It's like a completely parallel universe.
It just is. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
I tell you a secret. I get a little bit scared coming straight off the back of live stuff with strong opinions, because I think, what if I'm calling it wrong? What if I've read it wrong? What if, as the dust settles, I'm going to have to eat some humble pie or even perhaps apologise on air? This is a prime ministerial resignation statement. Can you really go straight to the people now with the microphone and start putting the... But it was bloody awful, Hayley, wasn't it? Absolutely awful.
It was absolutely dreadful, and it's it's rude.
Yes.
If anything,
rude.
it takes us all for complete idiots. And also the third thing I just want to quickly mention is, I guess it's just something that I don't really understand. Bearing in mind, we're not in a presidential system. He is the elected member of the Conservative Party to lead the country. How is it that the 1922 committee can't just say, excuse me, Boris, you're going, your time is up? How is it he has any leverage to stay at all at this point?
I think constitutionally that's because the Queen asked him to form a government, and the mandate he receives from the Queen remains in place until there is a new leader of the Conservative Party, who will then have to go to the palace and receive permission from the Queen to form a government. So it's one of those slightly arcane conventions and traditions that even he can't ride roughshod over. I tell you what, I mean, just thinking of to how things could have unfolded differently, I do wonder what would have happened if they just waited a couple of weeks for that confidence vote. I mean, talk about jumping the gun on that one. And they came quite close, but my goodness me, the number of people that would vote for him now would be presumably basically everyone in the cabinet and nobody else. And 5 of them wouldn't, we know. So it's the cabinet minus 5 would be on the pro-Boris Johnson side of proceedings. Good
or
grief.
they would say, I have voted for you, but just to let you know, I don't believe in it.
Oh, Hayley, thank you. I think we could all do with a giggle at times like this, and also quite a suitable, for a son of Yorkshire, quite a suitable criticism there from an unsigned texter saying, James, there is only one R in Lancaster. You're quite right, there is only one R in Lancaster, but my school was one of the only places in the English-speaking world where they described Sunday church as Mass rather than Mass, so you could take the boy out of the pronunciations. It's rather hard to take the pronunciations out of the boy. And there it is. Thank you for keeping me company today, and indeed over this nightmare of the last 3.5 years or so, as we've seen, or the last 3 years or so, as we've seen all of the things that we hold dear, democratically speaking, and in terms of common decency and the very least expectations of what we expect to see in public office, denigrated so completely, so violently, and so shamelessly. And I'm almost grateful to Boris Johnson there for just reminding us at the end that all of the words I use to describe him are fair and accurate, and in some ways not even adequate, because he is utterly reprehensible, utterly vile, utterly despicable. And in the final pass, even then, he couldn't help but revert to type and trumpet bogus victimhood, absence of contrition, and unapologetic calumnies. Goodbye, Boris Johnson, and may we never look upon your like again.